Chapter 1574, Qualified to Explore the Universe. When the cultivator army from the vast expanse school saw what was happening, they gasped, and excitement grew. The old lizard's eyes went wide from the thought of how Meng Hao's power seemed to be completely limitless. This is transcendence, it's omnipotence. The sect leader's eyes burned with hope. Jin Yunqian was panting. Meng Hao looked down at the vicious dragon, and his eyes glimmered with profound light. Then he turned toward the Devil Realm continent. The cultivators from that continent were already fighting with the forces from the vast expanse school. To Meng Hao, it looked almost exactly the same as what had occurred with the immortal god continent. He sent his divine sense out and soon noticed one particular clan. It was the Li clan, the remnants of those who weren't able to self-detonate in the mountain and sea war. Like the Wang clan, they were not participating in the fighting. They had sealed themselves away, and all of their cultivators sat there silently. One of the people present there wasn't a member of the Li clan. It was Yuan Jian, echelon cultivator from the 7th Mountain and Sea, who had been sent to infiltrate one of the two great powers, just like Dao Heaven had. The Devil Realm continent had no statues, only an enormous coffin. Furthermore, there were no cultivators present who lacked the soul strands of the will of the vast expanse. Although the entire land mass seemed to be a flourishing place, that was only a facade to mask the decay and rot which was its true nature. Just when Meng Hao was about to retract his divine sense, his eyes went wide as he noticed someone in particular who was sitting cross-legged next to the huge coffin. Meng Hao recognized the man. "Chumentai," he said softly. He took a step forward, vanishing to reappear next to the coffin in front of Chumentai. Chumentai looked much older than he had before, and he didn't seem to be surprised to see Meng Hao. In fact, when he looked up, his eyes focused, and a smile broke out on his face. "You came." Meng Hao looked at Chumentai, eyes flickering with various memories. Finally, he nodded. "The person you are waiting for, your master, was the transcender from the Devil Realm continent. Actually, around the time the mountain and sea realm was destroyed, the spell formation fully activated. My master returned at that time. The person I've been waiting for since then is you." Smiling, Chumentai rose to his feet and reached out to touch the coffin. Rumbling sounds could be heard, and the coffin began to vibrate. In front of Meng Hao's very eyes, it gradually withered up and transformed into ash. Soon, the spot previously occupied by the coffin was nothing more than an empty space. The ash spread out, filling the entire landmass, and then slowly settling down onto the continent. Everywhere the land began to change, transforming into the color of blood. However, it wasn't the crimson red of fresh blood, but the dark purple of decaying rot. What was happening, of course, was that the true color of the lands was now being revealed. Without the power that had previously been disguising it, mountains became nothing but barren mounds. Plants became withered stumps, and numerous buildings became crumbled ruins. Rivers turned into dusty gulches. The seas became empty basins, and countless life forms melted into blackened blood. The rot and decay which were the true base of everything in the continent was now revealed. The Devil Realm continent seemed to pass through time. It was as if a veil had been ripped away, revealing something from countless years in the past. Chumentai looked back at Meng Hao. "The reason I stayed behind was to pass a message on to you from my master. There are two things I need to tell you. The first thing," he said softly, "is that the destruction of the mountain and sea realm had nothing to do with the real Devil Realm or immortal god continent. Both of them suffered calamity long ago. Most of the cultivators died at that time, and those who survived escaped with my master. They left the starry sky of the vast expanse and traveled far away into the universe. Everything you see here is the will of the starry sky of the vast expanse. It was all created from nothing. The corpses were animated and filled with memories extracted from within the stream of time. Anyone born inside of this starry sky will be remembered by the will of the vast expanse, and their memories can be used to recreate a new version of that person. In fact, everyone here on this land mass is unaware of what they really are. They think that they exist, but the truth is that they are either corpses or the manifestations of memories. In fact, I used to be one of them myself. That was why I never gave up on trying to resurrect my master. It wasn't until the mountain and sea realm was destroyed that I finally understood everything." None of this was a surprise to Meng Hao. In fact, from the moment he laid eyes on the 5 pillars outside the vast expanse, he had begun to speculate regarding the truth. That was why the devil and the god had destroyed 2 of all heaven's fingers. then left the vast expanse behind to go explore the universe they had come to behold upon transcending. That universe was filled with unending seeds, each one of which was a world unto itself, with its own starry sky. Tai took a deep breath and said, "Therefore, if you wish to prevent the mountain and sea realm from being destroyed again, you have to eradicate all heaven." This is the second part of the message. The true all heaven exists outside the vast expanse. You will only have one chance to destroy him if that is what you wish. The ghost tried, my master tried, and later the god tried. However, none of them were a match for all heaven. The most they were able to do was destroy one of his fingers, after which they were forced to leave. First was the ghost, then the devil, then the god. With each encounter, all heaven grew weaker. However, despite being weakened to such an extent, he was still too powerful to be destroyed by a transcendent cultivator. The only way to destroy him was to weaken him to the absolute level and then send another transcender against him. You are the last hope there is to destroy all heaven. When all heaven is at his weakest, you will have one chance to eradicate him. If you fail, then you will become like my master or the other two transcenders. Your true self will no longer qualify to remain within this starry sky, and you will be expelled. You might be able to leave a clone behind, but that clone would never be able to eradicate all heaven. It wouldn't qualify. Who sets those qualifications? Meng Hao asked, eyes glittering. The ultimate magical law, which exists above the ancestor realm, the natural law of the universe itself. Do you know how all heaven came to be? The longer they conversed, the brighter Meng Hao's eyes glowed, until they were like burning suns that left even Tai trembling. If so, please explain. With that, he clasped hands and bowed to Tai. Chapter 1575, Battling the Devil Continent. It's hard to say for sure, Tai said softly, his eyes flickering with reminiscence. There is an 80% chance that he's from somewhere else in the universe, from some world that even I have never heard of. Actually, my master speculates that the will of our starry sky wasn't originally that of all heaven. My master, along with the god and the ghost, are now unable to remain inside the starry sky of the vast expanse with their true forms. In fact, their connections to this place have been almost completely severed. Now they roam the eternally boundless universe, where they walk the path of that which exists beyond transcendence. As for you, you are also destined to walk that path. They are waiting for you out in the universe. Tai's body gradually began to fade, transforming into a huge, rumbling vortex that sucked the Li clan into it before vanishing. The starry sky rumbled as a huge rift was torn open into it. Then the Devil Realm continent went silent. The only things that remained behind were the faint echoes of Tai's parting words. In the silence that reigned after Tai's departure, the forces from the vast expanse school looked around in shock at the decay around them. They had their various speculations about what exactly was happening, but they did nothing. One by one, they began to look over at Meng Hao. Meng Hao closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. They were profound and deep, to the extent that no one would ever be able to tell what he was thinking. He looked around at the ruins of the Devil Realm, then sighed. "It's over," he said softly. "My hatred for the immortal God and Devil Realm continents has come to an end. The hatred which festered for countless years is now resolved." As of this moment, Meng Hao realized that his hatred for the immortal God continent and the Devil Realm wasn't even as intense as his hatred toward the 33 heavens. He had walked a path of slaughter and confusion, and as of this moment, despite having transcended, his heart was exhausted. "My enmity with the immortal God and the Devil Realm has come to an end, but the true battle has yet to be fought." His eyes flickered as he looked up at the starry sky. Within his divine sense, he had long since come to detect that out there in the starry sky, there were countless figures speeding in his direction. Those were countless living beings of all sorts, heading in his direction under the control of the will of the vast expanse. He knew full well that he and the will of the vast expanse had reached a point where only one would come out alive. The other would die. Even as he looked out into the starry sky, the Devil Realm continent began to shake. Just like the immortal God continent, it began to transform into a huge giant that radiated the aura of the will of the vast expanse. Everything here had been defiled. This land mass was not the true Devil Realm. It was merely a doppelganger made from the will of the vast expanse. Intense rumbling shook heaven and earth as the Devil Realm continent transformed into a giant. The mountain peaks became spikes that protruded from its skin. The mountain ranges became blood vessels, as did the rivers and the seas. Lands shook, and mountains were rocked. Intense rumbling could be heard as a face appeared. Two of the land masses seas sank down into pitch-black holes that were like eyes. Then those eyes opened. A huge arm appeared, and its hand clenched into a fist which rumbled toward Meng Hao. If that were all there were to it, it might not much to be concerned about, but it was at this point that, off in the distance, countless beams of light appeared. They came from all directions, seemingly endless, charging forward in a murderous attack. The entities within those beams of light were all very bizarre. The only similarity between all of them was that they were life forms from the starry sky of the vast expanse. They had been born here, and thus had no choice but to heed the commands of the will of the vast expanse. If the starry sky of the vast expanse wanted them to attack and exterminate Meng Hao and everything around him, then they wouldn't hesitate at all to accomplish that mission. Rumbling could be heard as they got closer and closer. The old lizard roared as it went on the offensive. Behind the gigantic lizard was the head, then the cultivators of the vast expanse school. After all the fighting they had just gone through, their killing intent was no less, and they didn't hesitate to charge towards the host of entities. Instantly, fierce battles broke out. Meng Hao looked around at everything, at the host of living beings and the giant's fist, and he began to laugh. The vast expanse and I cannot exist together, therefore I will topple the vast expanse. Without destruction there cannot be creation. All heaven, if you can become the will of the starry sky, then you can also be replaced. Neither the ghost, the devil, nor the god succeeded in that. But this time, I will. Meng Hao's eyes were glowing as brightly as suns. The incoming horde of living creatures was completely shocked by the sight of it, and yet there was a voice in their minds urging them on, telling them to pay any price to unleash slaughter. The entire starry sky was soon shaking. Meng Hao turned, clenching his hand into a fist to meet the incoming fist of the Devil Realm giant. He was like a bug compared to the giant, completely insignificant. When their fists met, a massive boom echoed out. Meng Hao's hair rose up a bit and he shivered slightly. However, the Devil Realm continent giant immediately began to shake and then began to fall apart. Before it could retreat, Meng Hao took a step forward, placing himself at the giant's abdomen where he stamped his foot down. Cracks spread out like a spiderweb, whereupon he took a second step, right above the giant's dantian. Another massive boom echoed out. Then Meng Hao took a third step, a fourth step, and a fifth step. With every step he took, he stamped his foot down onto the giant's body. By the time he reached the giant's chest, he was on his fifth step. The giant was shaking visibly, swaying back and forth, seemingly incapable of holding itself together. It was at that point that Meng Hao took his sixth step. That step placed him onto the giant's forehead. Cracking sounds echoed out and more rifts snaked out, spreading from the forehead out across the giant's entire body. The giant roared as if it were about to fight back, but then Meng Hao snorted coldly and took his final step, the seventh step. That step put him on the crown of the giant's head. One final step crushed anything and everything. I would like to highly recommend a book for all of you to read. It's not crazy long like a Chinese web novel. It's Unsold by Will White, and you could probably read the whole book in the time I'm taking off. I heard a while back that an established indie fantasy author had written a Xianxia-style book and had to check it out. I got in touch with the author, and he was kind enough to send me an ebook version, and I have to say, it's definitely worth reading. Instead of writing a full review of the book, I'll mention quickly what I liked and didn't like. What I liked was the excellent writing, as well as the intriguing universe he built. The action flows great, the descriptions are awesome, and he clearly put a lot of thought into the story. One minor thing I didn't like was that the main character was not particularly compelling to me. He seemed almost like a carbon copy of Qin Yu from Stellar Transformations, especially in the early chapters. Another thing I didn't like, and in fact the main thing that stuck out to me, was that despite the Xianxia-esque setting and the names of everything being Asian, the characters and the society they live in were not Chinese at all. You could change their names to Western names, and the story could have taken place in your standard fantasy setting. I've seen this kind of thing before in which Western authors try to make Kung Fu, Wuxia, or Xianxia settings more realistic by fixing the things that seem odd to the Western audience. Unfortunately, that tends to make things not authentic at all, especially to someone who understands the culture. Believe it or not, many of the oddities you laugh at in Chinese web novels are actually founded in reality. I did this same thing back when I was an aspiring writer and had just started to get interested in Chinese culture. However, that aspect is actually a positive in some ways. Do you have any friends or family who you've been trying to convince to read translations on Wuxia World, but they just can't get into it? This would be the perfect novel to read as an introduction, to hook them into some of the themes and concepts that readers of Chinese novel translations are already used to. I also have to point out that the universe of Unsold is not supposed to be ancient China, so it all works out fine in the end as long as you aren't expecting an authentic Chinese experience. Check out Unsold here. 7 God Steps. It was a magical technique that could build up explosive power and actually originated in the Devil Realm continent. Now, Meng Hao was fueling it with the power of transcendence, causing it to reach a terrifying and virtually indescribable level. In this case, describing it as something which could crush and destroy heaven and earth was no exaggeration. As of this moment, that was literally what Meng Hao was doing. BOOMMM. As that 7th step landed, the giant that was the Devil Realm continent, the doppelganger of the will of all heaven, shuddered violently. Then its head shattered, transforming into countless chunks of rubble that burst out in all directions. Next was its neck, its torso, its arms, and its legs. Massive rumbling echoed out as this giant, which could cause even 9 essences experts to tremble, exploded, sending a shockwave blasting out into the starry sky. "Come out and fight, all heaven," Meng Hao said, swishing his sleeve and causing a huge tempest to rise up. His words weren't spoken very loudly, and yet they contained a majestic natural law, transforming them into a shockwave that swept out with incredible power. All of the attacking life forms who were swept over by that shockwave instantly coughed up blood and then were shredded away into nothing. The entire starry sky shook, and countless heavenly bodies trembled. Land masses were shattered, and asteroids became dust. Arcane pocket realms, vortexes, and worlds all trembled beneath the sound of Meng Hao's voice. As of that moment, Meng Hao was truly the most powerful entity within the starry sky of the vast expanse, and he was issuing a challenge to the will of that starry sky. 2. All heaven. However, the will of the starry sky didn't seem inclined to respond to Meng Hao at all. The response to his words came from the surrounding living beings, within whose mind a cold voice suddenly spoke. Kill them all, spare no cost. Stain the starry sky red with blood. Even if nothing living remains, you must kill. To all heaven, none of the living creatures within the starry sky of the vast expanse were important. The only important thing was the threat that Meng Hao posed. All heaven had no choice but to respond, and had no choice but to feel incredible fear and terror. Before the face-to-face battle occurred, if the deaths of the living creatures in the vast expanse could expose a flaw in Meng Hao, then it would all be worth it. All heaven wanted to observe Meng Hao's essence, wanted to understand Meng Hao's Tao, wanted to memorize his magics. All heaven wanted to understand Meng Hao and thus be more confident in being able to fight him directly. The sounds of intense fighting instantly rose up as the countless incoming living beings attacked with red-eyed madness. The cultivators from the vast expanse school couldn't possibly hold their own against such an overwhelming force and were slowly being pushed back. The enemy forces were simply too numerous. There were so many that it was virtually impossible to describe. It was as if all life forms in the starry sky of the vast expanse were on the warpath. There were numerous paragons. 9 essences experts could be seen. All of them were fighting like mad, ignoring any injury to themselves, even resorting to self-detonation. Meng Hao looked at what was happening and then closed his eyes. However, that only lasted for one short breath of time. Then his eyes opened again, and they shone with merciless coldness. He took a step forward and suddenly appeared on the western side of the battlefield. All of the living beings there who saw him descending began to tremble from within the depths of their hearts. I call upon the power of my name to seal the life forces of all beings in this area. With that, he extended his right hand and then pushed it down. Something like infinite howling could be heard. Natural laws were forcibly altered, and magical laws were stripped away. All of the living beings began to tremble as their cultivation bases and life forces were altered by the changes to the natural and magical laws. Their cultivation bases began to crumble, and their life forces went dim. In the blink of an eye, countless beings were transformed into corpses. Innumerable bodies floated in the starry sky, with Meng Hao being the only living person. As he hovered there, mixed emotions could be seen on his face, and yet there was no regret visible as he looked coldly at the groups of living beings in the other 3 directions. Gasps rang out, but the will of the vast expanse urged them on with even more intensity than before. However, considering they were facing Meng Hao, an entity of unimaginable, inconceivable power, they almost couldn't muster the energy to move, and their minds were overwhelmed with dread. Only those who kowtow to me and call upon my name, those who acknowledge allegiance to me, will be able to continue existing within this starry sky. Those who resist will die along with all heaven. The sight of him hovering there surrounded by countless corpses caused his words to seem even more thunderous than before. Even as the feeling of awe filled the living beings, the will of all heaven crushed down on them with even more intense power. It was like a howling roar that caused all of the living beings to tremble. Their eyes were bloodshot as they once again began to fight. At the same time, more creatures appeared off in the distance. Frowning, Meng Hao let out a cold harumph. His eyes flickered with killing intent as he took another step forward. At the same time he spoke, his voice as cold as ice. I hereby deprive you of your right to practice cultivation, and also extinguish the flame of your life forces. As soon as the words left his mouth, the void trembled and began to collapse. Blood sprayed out of the mouths of the surrounding outsiders as the properties within their blood that allowed them to practice cultivation suddenly melted. The flames of their life force were also extinguished. More blood sprayed about in all directions, and soon, nothing was left behind but swathes of corpses. Meng Hao hovered there, looking around at the living creatures of the vast expanse. He said nothing, choosing only to raise his right hand. From the look of it, all he had to do was lower that hand, and all of the surrounding beings would be wiped out of existence. That was the incredible level of power that was transcendence. All of the various beings present collapsed mentally. They were shaking, petrified, and despite the lashings of the will of all heaven, they couldn't forget the terrifying things they had just witnessed. That in itself caused the will of all heaven to begin to crumble. It was impossible to say who did it first, but one by one, the various living beings of the vast expanse dropped to their knees, their minds blank, their hearts in complete chaos. I acknowledge allegiance. I acknowledge allegiance. We acknowledge allegiance. Countless voices echoed out from near and far, even from those beings far off in the distance. All beings were acknowledging allegiance. Meng Hao hovered there in the starry sky, looking off into the distance, his eyes radiating killing intent. All heaven, show your damn face right now, he roared. Chapter 1576, All beings acknowledge allegiance. /expand. All beings acknowledged allegiance. All life forms in the starry sky of the vast expanse were kowtowing to Meng Hao, bearing witness to the fact that he was truly in a position to challenge the will of all heaven to battle. The cultivators of the vast expanse school were also kowtowing, their hearts filled with intense emotions regarding Meng Hao. The sect leader and the others had the same feeling. The heavens are going to change, the sect leader thought, gasping, his eyes shining with brilliant light. As of this point, a cold snort suddenly echoed out to fill the starry sky of the vast expanse. It seemed to come from everywhere, from every living thing, from every planet, from every land mass, from every vortex, from every particle of dust. In concert with the voice, the natural and magical laws of the starry sky twisted and distorted. In the blink of an eye, light began to swirl from all directions and began to form together in front of Meng Hao into the shape of a person. It was enormous. It was as if the starry sky itself were its body, the planets its eyes, the worlds its bones. It was a vague image at first, but the mere sight of it was shocking to the extreme and caused incredible pressure to crush down onto all cultivators. However, the figure then began to shrink down rapidly, and at the same time the pressure increased. Every cultivator coughed up blood and shook visibly. Meng Hao's hair was whipping around his head, and his clothes were flapping. Soon the figure in front of him was only 30,000 meters tall, and then only 30 meters. As it continued to shrink, its features grew clearer. It was a young man. He wore a long robe decorated with a starry sky. He had long hair which floated around him, and sharply angled eyebrows. He was handsome to an extreme degree, and from the aura which emanated out from him, he seemed to be the lord of all existence. Under his gaze, all living things would prostrate themselves, and not dare to even lift their heads. And yet when Meng Hao looked at this young man, he could detect a very faint aura of death. This person was none other than All Heaven. Of course, he was not All Heaven's true form, he was a clone. All Heaven's true form was incapable of actually entering the vast expanse. He existed outside the vast expanse. And yet, this clone of All Heaven was very close to his true form in terms of power. This was perhaps his most powerful manifestation, something which could never be completely separated from his true form. He had never intended to appear in such a way so soon. He had tried all the methods at his disposal, and yet had been unable to do anything about Meng Hao. Thus, he appeared personally. The time had come for him to begin the ultimate battle with Meng Hao. The best outcome would be to win this fight. However, even if he lost, the information learned would be of extreme benefit to his true form. Even if his true form ended up weakening further later on, it still might give him what he needed to eke out a victory. "You should never have reached this state," said All Heaven's clone, his expression cold and filled with something extremely ancient. Meng Hao looked at the young man, his eyes shining with a profound light as he said, "I never came after you looking for a fight. You plotted and schemed against me constantly. Now, I have transcended. There's no need to push this into a battle of life or death. I might be able to ignore your true form outside the vast expanse, All Heaven. However, inside the vast expanse, I don't need any other heavens above my head. The only reason you exist is so that I can live," the clone said, shaking his head. "Even if you didn't come looking for me, I would have come looking for you. What has happened between the two of us was foreordained, and only one of us can survive. Either you replace me or I consume you." All Heaven's eyes glittered with killing intent, and yet deeper inside was a profound loneliness that seemed to contain countless memories. "Things shouldn't have turned out this way. You should never have reached this state. You were supposed to be nothing more than fuel to drive my rebirth." With a sigh, he lifted his right hand and pointed at Meng Hao. "But since you insisted on climbing to this height, then I shall now bring order to all of this chaos. All true demons who appear in this world cultivate based on my bloodline. Blood of All Heaven, inflict your punishment." As soon as the words left the mouth of All Heaven's clone, a tremor ran through Meng Hao, and all of the blood within his body began to boil out of control. His veins, his bones, his flesh, all of it came from an All Heaven clan. He was from an All Heaven bloodline and was an All Heaven immortal. Because of all of that, the simple wave of a finger caused all of those things to explode. Countless drops of blood oozed out from his pores, instantly staining his clothing red. And yet, he continued to hover in place, completely unmoving. "If you trace my bloodline back, it really does originate with you. But in the moment I reached transcendence, what transcended was not just my fleshly body, but also my soul and my blood." By this point, the boiling of his blood had reached a fever pitch. At the same time, an enormous figure appeared behind him. It started out vague, but rapidly became clear, and soon it was obvious that it was an enormous image of Meng Hao. He looked like a divine spirit hovering there in the starry sky. His body was covered with chains and shackles of all sorts, and yet in the same instant that he appeared, all of those bonds began to shudder, as if on the verge of shattering. As the chains and shackles were destroyed, it was obvious that they were somehow connected to the clone of All Heaven. "When my blood transcended, I could tell that there was still a faint connection in there. I was waiting this whole time to face you in person, and then completely sever anything connecting me to you." Meng Hao's eyes flashed with light as he lifted his right hand, and then chopped it down in front of him. That chopping motion caused the starry sky to become a sharp blade, glittering with the brilliant light of the heavens, as it slashed down at the space between Meng Hao and All Heaven's clone. In that moment, the chains binding the enormous figure behind him began to tremble. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out as they began to shatter into fragments. The figure behind Meng Hao stretched his arms out wide. Cracking sounds emanated out in all directions as the chains and shackles were destroyed. Then, the enormous figure began to grow larger than before, as if it had freed itself from some unknown restraints. This was true freedom. Freedom and independence were the Tao of Meng Hao. As of this moment, he had now severed himself from any and all connections to All Heaven. As of this moment, his Tao was rising to the highest heights. From this moment on, he was his own man. The origin of his blood was severed, buying him true freedom. Chapter 1577, Severing the Root of the Bloodline. Important explanation about Beseech the Devil and Renegade Immortal. I've been seeing a lot of comments with speculations about how the stories all tie together, and how that might give clues about the ending of I Shall Seal the Heavens. Although the three stories definitely have a lot of connections, the overall plot of each story stands alone. In other words, All Heaven does not appear in either BTD or RI. Those stories are not about the main characters severing the fingers of All Heaven. Chapter 1578, All Heaven Transformation. In that moment of severing, Meng Hao's cultivation base advanced. Although he was still half a step into the ancestor realm, he made significant progress. His hair whipped about and his energy surged. He took a deep breath, and the entire starry sky of the vast expanse shook. The eyes of All Heaven's clone went wide as he glared at Meng Hao. "I am the will of the starry sky," he said. "I am its soul. My words are natural law and my thoughts are magical law. On this day I lay down a new law. Wherever I stand, there shall be no safe place for this cultivator." As soon as the words left the clone's mouth, the starry sky began to tremble. Rumbling like thunder could be heard, and rifts opened up above. Cracking sounds could be heard as the rifts spread out and joined together. Heaven-rending, earth-crushing power radiated out as a new natural law appeared. At the same time, the void around Meng Hao began to collapse, transforming into a huge black hole. It was as if this new natural law caused all existence to be unwilling to get near Meng Hao. According to this natural law, there was no safe place for Meng Hao in this starry sky. The black hole was not a true black hole, but rather a manifestation of how the starry sky and the void itself would not permit Meng Hao to safely remain within them. As they retreated, a hole was left behind, something infinitely dark that connected to the area outside the vast expanse, to the universe. If Meng Hao fell inside of it, he would eventually be driven completely away. The battle had advanced beyond the use of divine abilities and into the realm of fighting with natural law. It was a terrifying level of combat that exceeded the imaginations of most cultivators. It was a type of combat only for transcendent cultivators. At his current level, Meng Hao could not create brand new natural laws with a single word. However, he could change them. Eyes glittering brightly, he said, "My Tao is that of freedom and independence, of being unrestrained and unfettered. I do not wish to have heavens looming over me that belong to someone else. My Tao is my essence. Wherever I stand, I can call upon the essence of my Tao to dispel and shatter natural and magical laws. Nobody can expel me from this place." He flicked his sleeve, causing the power of his Tao essence to rumble out, changing the natural and magical laws, which twisted and shattered. Beneath him, the black hole vanished, causing everything to return to normal. Of course, only all heaven was aware that in this battle of natural laws, the danger involved vastly exceeded anything that ordinary cultivators could comprehend. All heaven's eyes flickered as he said, "I strip you of your control of the 5 elements and create a new magical law." Meng Hao waved his sleeve. "The 5 elements exist within the essence of my Tao. Wherever the light of my Tao shines, the 5 elements cannot be dispersed." All heaven's voice boomed like thunder as he said, "The light of the starry sky shall never shine upon you. I strip away your ability to see light." Suddenly, Meng Hao was surrounded by pitch-black darkness. It was as if he couldn't detect any light at all, as if he were fusing into the darkness, becoming a part of it. Meng Hao snorted coldly. "I am a transcendent cultivator, half a step into the ancestor realm. The light of the starry sky doesn't deserve to touch me. You don't need to strip it away, I hereby tell it to screw off." Moments ago, he had been physically fading away, but now he was as clear as day. Not only had he dispelled the light, he had dispelled and cast away the darkness too. All heaven's face twisted with rage. Although he had the advantage in this battle of natural laws and also had the initiative, he felt a sense of helplessness when facing Meng Hao. "Your soul is your flame, your mountains and seas your land. Henceforth, the mountains and seas are not permitted to exist, and your soul is not permitted to burn with life. If I cease to exist, then the entire starry skies will go with me." A look of disdain could be seen on Meng Hao as he faced these natural laws of all heaven. At the same time, a domineering aura was radiating out from him. "My words caused all living things to exist in this world. Now, my words will cause you to be killed in body and soul. How could you possibly survive?" All heaven began to walk forward, and every step he took caused the starry sky to tremble. Meng Hao also started walking forward, and his steps likewise caused everything to shake. "You can destroy my body and disperse my cultivation base, but my soul and my Tao essence will remain. If you, the will of this starry sky, are like a boundless sea, then I am like a mountain crag which stands eternally within those waters. No matter how your waves batter me, I will always remain." He fought back relentlessly against the invisible power of all heaven. No matter how powerful the new natural laws were, he didn't flinch from them, and in fact, crushed them underfoot. All heaven would create them, and Meng Hao would destroy them. Although Meng Hao actually wasn't a full match for all heaven, destroying natural laws was much easier than creating them. The surrounding creatures of the vast expanse were falling back at top speed. The fight between Meng Hao and all heaven was something they couldn't participate in. They simply retreated, their minds reeling. As for the paragons and the 9 essences beings, they were completely and utterly shaken. They were trembling, and their eyes were wide as they tried their best to learn something from the battle of natural laws which was unfolding in front of their very eyes. All of those people were a step away from transcendence, and yet that step was an enormous one to take successfully. But now, thanks to this battle which they were able to witness, they were receiving unheard of benefits. Transcendence, this is transcendence. In the Deosaurus realm, you can actually create natural laws and also destroy them. The sect leader and the others couldn't help but gasp as they paid rapt attention to what was happening. Meng Hao had just severed his own bloodline to acquire true freedom and independence. Not even the natural laws being thrown against him did any good. The eyes of All Heaven's clone glittered with cold light as he took another step, whereupon his energy surged to even higher levels. A tempest sprang up which swept across the starry sky, causing everything to rumble. The clone's eyes flickered with killing intent. All Heaven first transformation. As soon as the words left his mouth, he began to increase in size. 8 blobs of flesh sprouted from his shoulders which began to split apart. Shockingly, they transformed into 8 heads. Including the head he originally had, he now had a total of 9. His body also began to change shape. It was no longer humanoid, but rather that of a snake, fully 3 million meters long. His appearance could shake heaven and earth and was indescribably ferocious. All 9 heads looked over at Meng Hao, and then roared, unleashing an incredible sound wave which even shifted the locations of the heavenly bodies it passed by, and shoved the nearby cultivators back. It was a power that was second to none. Chapter 1579, Emperor Dragon Transformation. Among those 9 heads were men and women, old and young, people and beasts. Their roar caused Meng Hao's pupils to constrict. For some reason, something seemed very wrong about All Heaven as of this moment. Shockingly, faces could be seen on all of the scales of his snake body, making him seem utterly and thoroughly terrifying. The blast of wind caused by the roar of the 9 heads was something that only 9 essences experts could endure without being knocked unconscious. This 9-headed serpent was an entity that virtually no one recognized, and yet it filled them all with terror. In contrast to everyone else, Old Lizard let out a cry of disbelief at the sight of those 9 heads. All of the scales on its body stood on end. "The 9-head tribe," cried the lizard. "It's from the 9-head tribe. They were destroyed years ago in a previous epoch. According to the legends, they were one of the most powerful of the beast tribes back when the starry sky of the vast expanse had just been created. The 9-head tribe was invincibly domineering for 10 full epochs. It was entirely possible that the old lizard was the only individual present who knew anything about the existence of the 9-head tribe, mostly because it actually possessed a bit of that tribe's bloodline within it. 1. This 9-head tribe appears to be a reference to a race of beings from Beseech the Devil. In fact, I was doing a bit of research and noticed that there is a huge lizard which appears in the early parts of that same story. I'm not sure if that's the same lizard as the old lizard mentioned here, but I wouldn't be surprised. Another interesting thing is that 10 epochs of time passed in the final chapters of Beseech the Devil. Even as the old lizard was shrieking, Meng Hao's eyes flickered. When he looked at the 9-headed serpent, he couldn't help but think back to the immortal God continent and the Devil Realm continent. Everything which has ever existed in this starry sky will be remembered and is imprinted upon the will of the starry sky itself. All Heaven can create something from nothing based on anything in his memory. Even as Meng Hao pondered these things, All Heaven looked at Meng Hao with 18 eyes, eyes that glowed with brutal madness. Suddenly, he blurred into motion, leaving behind afterimages and kicking up a wild tempest. Rumbling sounds echoed out as he appeared directly in front of Meng Hao, his tail sweeping out in a vicious attack. The starry sky crumbled under the power of the tail, which exceeded the 9 essences level. Heavenly bodies collapsed, and Meng Hao's eyes glittered with an icy light as he clenched his right hand into a fist and punched straight out. As the fist made contact with the tail, the void shattered, massive rumbling sounds echoed out, and the serpent that was All Heaven shuddered. Meng Hao trembled as he tumbled backward, and yet even as he fell back, the 9-headed serpent's eyes all closed. A tear emerged from each closed eye, a total of 18. As the tears appeared, a shocking aura of resentment exploded out. Then the tears glistened, transforming into 18 beams of light that shot toward Meng Hao. 9-head tears, 9-head tears, the old lizard howled. Watch out, Meng Hao, that's the killing move of the 9-head tribe. All the resentment in his body is converged into a magic of ultimate destruction. As the 18 glistening tears bore down on Meng Hao, his eyes flickered, but he did nothing to evade. Hovering in place, he lifted his right hand and pushed it out toward the tears. "Beginning," he said. Immediately, a demon-sealing hexing magic was unleashed. Considering that his hexing magics were absolutely complete and backed by the power of transcendence, their power was enough to shake the entire vast expanse. In response to the single word he had spoken, the 8 teardrops stopped in place, looking as though they would dissolve at any moment. As soon as Meng Hao spoke the word beginning from the beginning-ending hex, all things returned to their basic essence. Seeing that the killing move had been negated, the nine-headed serpent's 18 eyes opened, and it roared. Shockingly, its body began to split apart. Numerous figures burst out from inside, and if one looked closely, one would see that they were all nine-headed serpents of various sizes and shapes. There were more than 10,000 in total, all of them radiating resentment and madness as they shot toward Meng Hao. The tribal death blow, I can't believe. It's the tribal death blow of the Nine-Heads tribe. Supposedly, members of the Nine-Head tribe can unleash this move in the moments before being killed. By making a self-sacrifice of mutual destruction, they can unleash the full power of their tribe to destroy any enemy. The old lizard was trembling at the sight of what was happening. The countless nine-headed serpents emitted shrill shrieks as they spun through the air like a huge wave, closing in on Meng Hao with raging killing intent. The nine-head tribe might have been powerful, but they never produced a transcender, murmured Meng Hao. Even if one of them reached fleshly body transcendence, that's still not good enough. This version of the tribe was created by the first all-heaven transformation and didn't come about naturally. It's nothing more than a flight of fancy. With that, Meng Hao clenched his right hand into a fist. Ending, he barked. Rumbling could be heard as the beginning-ending hex was fully unleashed. Boundless power erupted from Meng Hao's Tao essence, forming into his hand, which he slowly opened up into a palm. It was as if the starry sky existed within his hand, and that anything inside of his palm could be destroyed by simply closing his fingers. Are you Billy? The 18 tears were destroyed, and the rest of the nine-headed serpents all exploded, becoming nothing more than ash drifting about in front of Meng Hao. I can see what you're doing, all heaven. You just want to study my demon sealing hexing magic, don't you? Well then, I'll go ahead and show you. Killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes as he took a step forward, waving his hand to unleash the second hex. He was not the type to wait for others to take the initiative. Real, he said, and the starry sky trembled. At the same time, even as the nine-headed serpents were fading away, all heaven formed anew in the void up ahead, glaring at Meng Hao with the 18 eyes of his nine-head form. At the same time that the second demon sealing hex was unleashed, so was the second all-heaven transformation. Second transformation, Nine-Heads becomes a dragon, Emperor Dragon transformation. 1. I'm pretty sure this Emperor Dragon is something which appears in the later chapters of Renegade Immortal. All-Heaven threw his head back and howled. His body then began to grow, and it no longer looked like a serpent. Horns grew out of his head, and he sprouted 9 claws. 8 of his heads began to wither down, eventually becoming a crown that rested upon the only remaining head. All-Heaven's clone now hovered there in the starry sky, having taken the shocking form of an Emperor Dragon. Chapter 1580, Third Transformation. Emperor Dragons primarily ate serpents. They only existed for a short time within the starry sky of the vast expanse, less than 1,000 years. After that, the entire race vanished. Because of that, none of the living beings that currently existed would even recognize what an Emperor Dragon was. Not even the old lizard had ever seen one. People had seen dragons before, but not a dragon like this, with the crown of an emperor, 9 claws and pitch-black scales. It was ferocious to the extreme. However, the meaning of the character in the dragon's name actually wasn't emperor. It was leech. 1. In Chinese, the two characters used here for emperor and leech here have exactly the same pronunciation, even down to the tone, making this wordplay pretty cool in Chinese. A leech dragon. It had the normal whiskers of a dragon, but when it opened its mouth, what emerged was a razor-sharp, blood-sucking mouthpiece like that of a mosquito. Its entire appearance was shocking to the extreme. Virtually no one was even aware that such creatures had ever existed. They were extinct. In fact, the only person in the starry sky who knew about them was all heaven. By creating something out of nothing, he was able to use the leech dragon as his second transformation. Almost as soon as the Emperor Dragon appeared, its energy redoubled several times, reaching a completely shocking level that caused even Meng Hao to frown. He knew that all heaven was powerful, and that defeating him in battle would be no easy task. Now that he could see these all-heaven transformations for himself, especially the Emperor Dragon, he was left with an uneasy feeling of impending doom. This Emperor Dragon is not just transcendent in terms of fleshly body, but also cultivation base, thought Meng Hao. As for its soul, that appears to be its only limitation. However, from the look of it, all it would need would be some time to make that breakthrough. In fact, I've never encountered something that could actually break through to full transcendence so easily. Alheaven created something from nothing, and managed to make up for some of the deficiencies of the soul. This thing is actually the same type of living being as the nine-headed serpent, but in terms of overall level, that serpent couldn't even compare. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as the second demon sealing hex was unleashed, real unreal hexing. Instantly, the surrounding void filled with numerous bizarre fluctuations that rapidly coalesced into the form of a mirror. Unexpectedly, visible within that mirror was another Emperor Dragon, which looked exactly like the first. Even as the newly created Emperor Dragon roared, Meng Hao waved his hand, sending it flying toward Alheaven's Emperor Dragon. The sudden appearance of these two dragons was a shock to everyone present. Even as their cold gazes locked onto each other, an intense murderous aura exploded out from each dragon, which collided into the other. Both of them began to wither rapidly. This was the trump card of Emperor Dragons, the Emperor Dragon Cosmic Corrosion. Piercing howls echoed out as the two Emperor Dragons withered up. However, after only a moment passed, blood suddenly spurted out all over Alheaven's Emperor Dragon. In the blink of an eye, it was stained completely blood-red. Exuding an air of domineering madness, it then flew through the void toward Meng Hao like a shooting star. It closed in with spectacular speed, shattering the starry sky, seemingly bent on crushing anything that dared to get in its path. This was the ultimate divine ability of Emperor Dragons, blood tyranny. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the Emperor Dragon's energy and power rose to heights that could ignore all natural laws. As it closed in, Meng Hao snorted coldly, then waved his sleeve, causing his own Emperor Dragon to utilize the exact same divine ability. The two Emperor Dragons slammed into each other, and a huge boom echoed out. Meng Hao frowned as his own Emperor Dragon was shredded to pieces, completely incapable of harming Alheaven's dragon, which continued on with its deadly charge. It seemed as if all living beings, all types of power, all transcendent cultivators would be crushed by this attack. It was a simple attack, but an attack filled with infinitely destructive power. The simpler and madder the attack, the more powerful it was. Are you umble? The Emperor Dragon got closer and closer, 3,000 meters, 300 meters, 30 meters. The blood covering its body burned, and it looked like nothing in the starry sky could do anything to stop it. It was as if this attack was strong enough to break out into the universe itself. It seemed invincible, unblockable, capable of turning anything it struck into ash. The sense of deadly crisis within Meng Hao grew more intense. A transcendent Emperor Dragon making its ultimate attack. His eyes flickered with the desire to do battle. This was the first true fight he had experienced since transcending. The first all-heaven transformation didn't leave him with much of a desire to fight, but now, that feeling was burning hot within him. "What a pity," he said, shaking his head. Instead of fighting back, he simply reached up and pushed out with his hand. "Unreal." With that single word, he completed the unleashing the second demon sealing hex, the real unreal hexing. By using the real aspect of the hex, he created a projection of the dragon. But by using the unreal aspect, he could transform what was real into something illusory. If I say you really exist, then even if you die, you shall still exist. If I say you are not real, then you shall vanish into unreality. The ripples in the area suddenly faded away into shapelessness. A shocking energy blasted into the Emperor Dragon, which then lurched a halt a mere 3 meters in front of Meng Hao's hand, where it trembled, a look of disbelief shining in its eyes. "Disperse," he said, waving his hand gently to the left. Instantly, the Emperor Dragon's energy, all of its domineering power, all of its invincibility, was crushed away. The dragon's body shattered and it dispersed. The real unreal hexing could make things both real and unreal. "That's the best you've got, Alheaven. If so, I'm afraid you're not going to get a chance to see all of my demon sealing hexing magic." Meng Hao's eyes glittered as coldly as a sharp blade as he looked off into the void, where Alheaven was materializing back into another clone. His young face was ashen. Although Meng Hao's strength was not anything unexpected to him, he was still left with a feeling of lingering fear. However, he couldn't bring himself to admit that it was true strength on the part of Meng Hao. In his mind, it was merely weakness on his part after having existed for so long within the stream of time. "I won't stop fighting until one of us is dead," growled Alheaven's clone. Even as the words left his mouth, ghost fire sprang up all over him. It was the third Alheaven transformation. Chapter 1581. You think you can ruin me? All heaven created something out of nothing, using the mark of the first transcender from the starry sky of the vast expanse to create what he saw as the perfect body. It was none other than the ghost transformation. Ghost fire flickered in the eyes of All Heaven's clone as he transformed. Soon, the clone had become a spectral figure wreathed with ghost chi. Although his facial features weren't clearly visible, the sinister aura which emanated off of him filled the entire area. It was almost as if he were no longer All Heaven, but instead, another version of Patriarch Vast Expanse. Meng Hao's pupils constricted. This version of All Heaven was even more powerful than before, and the threatening pressure he exuded was even more intense. However, Meng Hao didn't hesitate to take the initiative. He flickered as he vanished, reappearing right next to the image of the ghost, whereupon he lifted his right hand up and then chopped it down. The ghost let out a sinister chuckle, and his body suddenly distorted and began to spin around Meng Hao. Ghost chi erupted out, and within the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged over 1,000 blows. The starry sky trembled as they fought with blinding speed. Strangely, when Meng Hao's attacks landed on the ghost, they passed right through him. It was almost as if they were completely ineffective. Similarly, the ghost's magical techniques were not able to fully affect Meng Hao. With Meng Hao's Tao as an essence, he could affect natural laws, making him as powerful as a mountain. At first, it seemed like neither would be able to do much to the other, but then the ghost's eyes flickered as he performed an incantation gesture. Then he began to speak in bizarre susurrations, deathly utterances that couldn't possibly come from the mouth of a living being. Instantly, the starry sky in the area began to fill with more ghostly figures. In the blink of an eye, there were far too many to even count. Voices could be heard speaking. Millions upon millions of vicious ghosts can consume body and soul. The ghosts' eyes glowed with bizarre light, and their words seemed distorted and twisted, filled with sinister malice. Then the countless ghosts howled shrilly as they began to speed in Meng Hao's direction. Meng Hao's eyes widened as the sensation of deadly crisis grew even more intense. Backing up, he let loose his cultivation base power, performing an incantation gesture with his right hand and waving his finger out in front of him. Third demon sealing hex. It was presentation hexing. This hex could manipulate the transformations of time, making countless eras pass by in the blink of an eye. In a single breath of time, the sky could grow ancient and the lands could become primordial. As the effects of the hex spread out, the starry sky withered. Before any of the ghosts could reach Meng Hao, they faded away into nothing. With the exception of transcenders, all living beings would have a very difficult time staving off the ravages of the passage of time. Of course, the ghost had transcended, but as for all of the ghosts that had been summoned, they had no such qualifications. As the ghosts were transformed into ash and smoke, the ghost version of All Heaven looked on with flashing eyes. This outcome was something he had predicted would happen, and in fact, a closer look would reveal that he was actually smiling. Even as that smile appeared, he began to speak in a bizarre voice. Millions upon millions of ghosts entomb the mind and transform it in my image. Go, invade the hearts of all, shadow heart tribulation. Even as the words left his mouth, his body began to distort and shrink, transforming into a shadow that couldn't be affected at all by Meng Hao's magical manipulation of time. He was like a blur as he shot toward Meng Hao. The drifting ash and dust that was all that remained of the ghosts from moments ago suddenly seemed to become sustenance for this shadow. As it neared, its power level rose to a level so high that apparently, the ghost didn't even need to get close to Meng Hao to hurt him. The shadow seemed to merge with the void, casting everything around Meng Hao into darkness. All Heaven's voice then began to echo out in all directions. Meng Hao, I will now ruin your demon-sealing hexing magic, your so-called third hex. The boundless shadows swirled around Meng Hao at high speed, emanating shocking coldness. As for Meng Hao, his eyes flickered icily as he performed an incantation gesture. However, the presentation hexing did nothing. Well done, ghost, he murmured. It was a critical juncture, and yet his expression was placid. Instead of continuing to try to force a result out of the third hex, he chuckled coldly and allowed the shadows to surge into his body. Soon, they had completely merged into him, fusing with him, becoming a part of him. This ghost version of All Heaven might not be able to kill Meng Hao, but the truth was that he didn't intend to. He wanted to find a weakness within Meng Hao's hexing magic, and then use that weakness to infect and even ruin that magic. Only by doing such a thing could he have a chance to cut Meng Hao down in their final battle. The truth was, What terrified all heaven the most was what had led Meng Hao all the way to transcendence in the first place. His demon-sealing hexing magic. You think you can ruin my demon-sealing hexing magic? Meng Hao let out a cold harumph. Although spectators wouldn't be able to tell, he knew that the power of present and ancient was completely beyond the ordinary. If it couldn't be defended against outside the body, then how much more powerful would it be inside the body, especially when backed by the power of the Deosaurs? The true question was, would the ghosts inside of Meng Hao ruin the hexing magic, or would the hexing magic destroy the ghosts? Rumbling could be heard as Meng Hao lifted his right hand up and touched his index finger to his forehead. In that instant, the present ancient power of time erupted out inside of him. The boundless power of time flowed through Meng Hao, seemingly soft, but as powerful as an ocean which, with enough time, could wear away even the most majestic of reefs. An explosion of time occurred inside of Meng Hao, and as that happened, the ghosts inside of him went mad. They began to weaken, until Meng Hao flicked his sleeve. It took only a single breath of time for 100 million years passed by. 10 breaths of time later, all of the ghosts inside of him were completely destroyed by the passage of time. He reached out his hand, and the present ancient hexing spun within his palm, filling up with countless figures, becoming a shining sphere. Finally, he clenched his hand into a fist, and a cracking sound could be heard as the sphere was smashed. Not too far away in the starry sky, All Heaven's clone coughed up a mouthful of blood, and within the vicious expression on his face could be seen just a touch of shock. "Time to finish things," Meng Hao said, his eyes flickering with killing intent. His murderous aura then transformed into a corporeal blade which slashed toward All Heaven. The fourth hex, self-hexing. Meng Hao was a blur as he shot toward All Heaven. In the time it took to blink, innumerable afterimages appeared. There were men and women, old and young, all of whom looked different from Meng Hao, and yet were fundamentally the same. That was because they were all clones produced by Meng Hao's self-hex. The self-hex could produce countless numbers of clones, entire worlds of life. It could transform heaven and earth, and could make the true form become an entire country. 100 clones appeared, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Rumbling could be heard as all the different versions of Meng Hao closed in on All Heaven's clone. Meng Hao waved his hand, and all of his clones waved their hands. The joint attack was like a tempest, shattering the starry sky, powerful enough to wipe out all living beings. All Heaven's clone hovered there, hair whipping wildly around his head. He was aware that he wasn't a match for Meng Hao's self-hex in this state. After all, this was a clone, not his true self. Not even this clone could handle Meng Hao, who was half a step into the ancestor realm. A boom rang out and All Heaven fell back, coughing up blood. However, his eyes shone with cold light, and his expression was ferocious as he stared at Meng Hao's clones, all of whom possessed the same essences as he did. All of a sudden, a look of focus appeared in All Heaven's eyes. "Fourth All Heaven transformation," he roared, "Devil's soul transformation." Even as the words left his mouth, his expression distorted, becoming more ferocious than ever. Cracking sounds rang out as razor-sharp bone spurs pierced out through his flesh all over his body. His head also changed, as 2 long horns grew out. Scales rippled out to cover his flesh, and at the same time, devil fire burst out, black flames that scorched everything around him. All Heaven's clone had completely changed, and was now wreathed in raging black flames. He was merely 300 meters tall at this point, but as he hovered there, the devil chi which swirled around him seemed capable of covering the entire starry sky. The sea of flames which surrounded him raged as he pushed one hand up above him, as if to support the heavens above, and the other hand down, as though to brace against all the earth below. Then, he began to take 7 steps forward. It was as if in all heaven and earth, he was the most supreme of all beings. He was the devil. Within all heaven's starry sky of the vast expanse, the devil was the second person to ever transcend. He was the basis of the fourth transformation, the devil's soul battle form. All Heaven looked up, his face expressionless, and the sea of flames churned. His eyes were crimson, his expression merciless, as if he were willing to consume anything and everything. He apparently lost command of all faculties of reason and instantly descended into madness. "Die!" he howled, turning into a blur and appearing directly in front of Meng Hao. There he clenched his hand into a fist and punched out. That fist carried with it the sea of flames, a destructive blast of fire backed by the starry sky itself. It was as if the entire world were packed into that fist, and the sheer power caused Meng Hao's pupils to constrict. He could sense that this fourth all-heaven transformation was explosively more powerful than the others. It was also incredibly fast. Meng Hao waved his sleeve out in front of him, which was mimicked by all of his countless clones. A blast surged out which then converged onto the image of the devil. Boom! This stretch of the starry sky had long since turned into a shattered battleground, as the void was repeatedly shredded and destroyed by the fighting. Meng Hao and all heaven fought back and forth like mad, wreaking such havoc on their surroundings that it seemed as if the starry sky might not be able to handle it for much longer. The full power of Meng Hao's self-hex unleashed countless clones that put him on almost equal footing with all heaven. All heaven, the devil embodied, threw his head back and howled, a howl filled with madness that could pierce through everything. Unbridled devil will. At the same time, a divine sense erupted out that could shake heaven and earth. It smashed down toward Meng Hao, filled with madness, murder, and blood. When it slammed into him, his face flickered. Even with his transcendent soul, it was actually difficult to withstand the power of the divine sense. Blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth as he backed up. This was his first time sustaining an injury during this battle with all heaven. In that same moment, the eyes of the all-heaven devil turned an even deeper red. Howling, he charged once more in attack. Underworld possession. As the words echoed out, the all-heaven devil transformed into countless black strands which sped through the air. Before Meng Hao could react, they bored into his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, as if to possess him. Meng Hao took a deep breath, then stretched his arms out wide. Self-hex, all creation becomes me. Instantly, countless versions of Meng Hao appeared around him, different from him and yet containing his essence. There were so many that they were impossible to count, stretching in all directions. Starry sky, thou shalt become my body. The destroyed starry sky in the area twisted, becoming almost like a mirror that cast countless reflections, making it seem as if the starry sky itself were made up of clones of Meng Hao. Where I stand, there doth exist my kingdom. His eyes snapped open, and they shone like the sun. He lifted his right foot into the air and stamped it down violently. Instantly, the starry sky teetered. Children of the kingdom, unite to protect mine soul. He took a deep breath, and as he did, the entire void around him was affected, as everything collapsed into ruin. It was as if a giant had sucked in a breath, except there was no giant, only Meng Hao. That single breath caused everything in the area to be completely destroyed. Along with the destruction, Meng Hao's essence clones transformed into beams of light that shot inside of him. The shattered starry sky, his kingdom, everything else that came from the self-hex, all fused back into him. Golden light exploded out from within him, until he looked like he was made of gold. Suddenly, he seemed as invincible as a fortress. His soul was now under the protection of countless self-hex clones, ensuring that the devil's possession attempt was doomed to failure. Begone from me, Meng Hao roared. The countless black threads which had bored into him were violently forced out. His body was like a battleground, within which the devil was completely vanquished and removed. However, even as the black devil threads were blasted away, a voice echoed out like that belonging to a divine being. It was as powerful as thunder, like the voice of a deity that could cause all living things to tremble. Fifth all-heaven transformation, heavenly God transformation. Chapter 1582, Heavenly God transformation. Chapter 1583, None can match my strength. As all heaven's words echoed out, the devil's souls transformed into a deep golden color. It was an ancient, upright color, filled with explosive strength. Then came a heaven-rending, earth-crushing roar as a giant appeared in front of Meng Hao, so large it seemed capable of propping up the heavens. He was tens of thousands of meters tall, and that didn't even seem to be the limit of how big he could be. The collapse of the starry sky seemed to expand, as if this giant could supersede the starry sky itself. He roared, causing all of the distant observing cultivators to cough up blood. However shaken they had been before, they were even more so now. This was a battle that not even 9 Essences experts could participate in. They could do little more than watch from a distance. The sect leader and the others were completely numb, and as for all of the other living beings from the starry sky of the vast expanse, they were retreating at top speed and didn't dare to pause for a moment. Meng Hao, the giant roared. As it turned to look at him, it revealed upon its forehead 10 stars. Not 9 stars, but 10. 1. Quasi-spoiler information about Renegade Immortal to follow. To some extent, 9 is the limit of the number of stars that could appear on the forehead of a cultivator in RI. In some ways, that is not the case. You will understand what I mean eventually if you read RI. In any case, the point here is that having 10 stars appear is unprecedented and indicates that this cultivator is at an extremely high level of power. The 10 stars radiated golden light, making this giant seem like a heavenly god. In fact, it would be correct to say that this was the god of the heavens. This was the fifth transformation, the heavenly god transformation. Golden light emanated from the giant's eyes, causing everything it looked at to be bathed in gold. Meng Hao's expression flickered as he backed up. Even as he did, everything around him began to melt. There was nothing around him except for the starry sky and the void, and yet it all melted, transforming into black liquid that emanated a stench of rot. Then, that liquid formed together into numerous enormous spheres with countless tentacles, almost like gigantic sea urchins. None can match my strength, the giant roared, its gaze locking onto Meng Hao as its right hand clenched into a fist and punched out. That fist seemed capable of wreaking ultimate destruction. It was like the pinnacle of the starry sky, and as soon as it appeared, it seemed impossible for it to miss its target. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed with the desire to fight. His fleshly body had already reached the ultimate peak, transcendence, so he unleashed his god-slaying fist, which slammed into the giant's incoming fist strike. The resulting deafening boom sounded like the vague howl of some primordial beast. Meng Hao was shaken. It felt like a wild wind of time was blasting into him, causing blood to spray out of his mouth as he was thrown backward like a kite with its string cut. However, the giant's fist was also left trembling. That didn't stop the giant, though. Roaring, it took a step forward and unleashed another fist strike. Rumbling echoed out as Meng Hao defended. Simultaneously, the giant opened his mouth and let loose a powerful roar. That roar shredded the void and destroyed natural laws. It was like a tempest that slammed into Meng Hao, causing blood to spray out of his mouth once more. Yet again, he fell back. The power being wielded by this heavenly god was shocking, and yet it only caused Meng Hao to want to fight even more. "Who cares about heavenly gods?" he said, waving his sleeve. Then his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture as he unleashed demon-sealing hexing magic. In that instant, the heavenly god giant's eyes shone with bright, flickering light and the desire to kill. He took a step toward Meng Hao, and his right hand began to move. However, he was doing something different than before. Even as his roar continued to echo out, his body suddenly began to wither. It was as if all of his flesh and blood were being sucked into his right arm. It was a shocking scene to behold, as the heavenly god giant's entire right arm began to get larger and stronger. Soon, it had broken through to a shocking level of power, whereupon it formed a fist that began to rumble toward Meng Hao. The level of danger Meng Hao sensed upon that fist was the most intense he had ever felt. He had never felt power like this since transcending. This was a peak-level power within the starry sky. In fact, it even went beyond the natural laws of the starry sky, exceeding all limitations. This was a level of power on par with the universe itself. This was not just simply the power of transcendence, it went to a realm beyond that, the ancestor realm. "Die!" bellowed the heavenly god giant. As its fist bore down, Meng Hao's pupils constricted into tiny dots. If he couldn't somehow handle this fist strike, he would definitely be defeated. Fifth hex, inside-outside hex. Meng Hao's eyes shone brightly as he reached out with his right hand and unleashed the inside-outside hex. A vortex suddenly popped up in front of his extended palm, within which pulsed the powers of both positive and negative. Even as the fist closed in, the power of the inside-outside hex pushed back toward it. The entire starry sky went still. A power of expulsion appeared from within Meng Hao's palm, the core of which came from Meng Hao's Tao essence. As it exploded out, the heavenly god giant's fist slowed down, eventually coming to a stop only a few centimeters in front of his palm. Meng Hao's eyes were completely bloodshot. The power of the inside-outside hex spread out, filling the area around him with endless contradictory power. A deadlock appeared to have formed. Madness grew within the eyes of the heavenly god giant, and then suddenly, one of the stars on its forehead began to shatter. As it did, the giant's power began to rocket up. Things weren't over yet, though. A second star exploded, then a third and a fourth. The explosions continued, and more power built up within the heavenly god giant's fist, which edged closer and closer to Meng Hao. "Still not enough," howled the giant. "Detonate!" A fifth star exploded, then the sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, and finally the 10th. In that moment, indescribably explosive energy surged through the body of the heavenly god giant. The fist, backed by the power of the self-detonation of 10 stars, slammed into Meng Hao's palm. Meng Hao's hand shattered, and blood sprayed out of his mouth as he was thrown backward. Cracking sounds emanated out as his bones were shattered, and his flesh and blood were shredded. This was the most serious injury he had suffered during the entire fight with All Heaven. Die/expand. Sixth All Heaven transformation. I am the immortal. The 10 stars on the forehead of the heavenly god giant exploded, seriously injuring Meng Hao. However, the result was that the giant's body was completely withered up. As All Heaven gave up on that body, he shrank down rapidly, and at the same time, an intense immortal chi exploded out from his chest. As the immortal chi erupted out, 2 hands suddenly burst out from inside the giant's chest, sending chunks of flesh and blood flying in all directions. A ripping sound could be heard as the giant's chest was torn open, allowing even more immortal chi to pour out. The incredible nature of the immortal chi spread out, creating something from nothing as numerous amounts of immortal jade suddenly appeared in the destroyed starry sky. The immortal jade glittered with radiant light, and despite the intense level of the fighting, the sight of it provoked a look of shock from Meng Hao. Then he subconsciously licked his lips. What a brazen strategy, he thought, and effective. It took supreme effort, but he managed to restore his composure after seeing the mounds of immortal jade. At the same time, a figure emerged from within the giant's chest. Surrounded by vast quantities of immortal chi, it was a middle-aged man. He had no hair on his head or anywhere else on his body, and his expression was completely placid. After appearing, he waved his hand behind him, causing the heavenly god giant to tremble and then collapse. However, instead of turning into ash, it transformed into a leather cloak. It was leather formed from the skin of the heavenly god, and as it settled down onto the middle-aged man with the immortal chi, it made him seem completely cold and ruthless. I am the immortal, the man said softly, his eyes shining with brilliant light as he looked at Meng Hao. The fact that you forced All Heaven to summon me means that you are an incredible foe. Even as his voice echoed out, the man vanished and then reappeared behind Meng Hao. Before Meng Hao could even turn around, the man had placed his hand onto Meng Hao's back. A boom rang out and blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth. And yet, his eyes flickered with a vicious light, and his left hand shot up to grab the man's wrist. You're not the immortal, Meng Hao growled. A surprised frown appeared on the man's face as Meng Hao jerked his hand out, sending the man tumbling through the air. At the same time, Meng Hao began to fly toward him. His right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and without any hesitation or pause, he pushed his hand down onto the man. Sixth hex, life-death hexing. This hex doesn't affect your freedom, it merely decides whether you live or die. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the immortal chi surrounding the man suddenly vanished. When he reappeared, he was off in another direction. At the same time, Meng Hao's sixth hex appeared to have done nothing. One hexing magic isn't enough, said the man. Why don't you use your seventh hex? His eyes shone with a strange light. He was clearly using augury to analyze the situation. The truth was that All Heaven really did want to fully analyze all of Meng Hao's hexing magic. Although he had witnessed them in the past, he had never personally experienced them. Only by doing so could his true form fully prepare to crush Meng Hao in battle. If you want to see what my hexing magics look like now that I've transcended, you'll have to show me some more of your transformations. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. Actually, his plans for this battle were similar to All Heaven's. All Heaven wanted to observe his hexing magic, but he wanted to test out all of the various All Heaven transformations. I refuse to believe that your All Heaven transformations can be augmented limitlessly, Meng Hao said coldly. After all, this is your clone, not your true form. There are probably some high-level transformations that you can't even use here. The man with the immortal chi gave a cold harumph. The immortal chi swirling around him began to grow more powerful, and his eyes grew sharper than ever. Fine, you want to see? I'll show you exactly what the immortal really is. The immortal is a man and a mountain. 1. It's been a while since this explanation of the character immortal came up. As a quick refresher, immortal is Chinese letter. The character for man or person is Chinese letter and mountain is Chinese letter. If you squeeze the Chinese letter off to side, it looks like this. Chinese letter, which you can combine with mountain Chinese letter to make immortal Chinese letter. This immortal version of All Heaven raised both hands up over his head so that they formed the shape of a mountain peak. Mountain, he roared. Instantly, the starry sky of the vast expanse began to tremble as a power began to descend from outside of the vast expanse. Everything trembled. Planets, land masses, and worlds all creaked under the pressure. Meng Hao could sense the power pushing him down, as though countless worlds were crushing down onto him. At the same time, the outline of a mountain appeared noiselessly above the head of All Heaven's clone. It was merely an outline, but it was filled with boundless pressure that seemed to lend an air of perfection to All Heaven. The immortal was a man and a mountain. Immortal magic is actually not a divine ability or a magical technique. Instead, it comes from essence. It is crushing pressure. From ancient times until now, the appearance of the immortal signifies pressure that can crush anything not immortal. Meng Hao, you said you want to see my transformations. Well, I'll demonstrate by crushing you. This immortal form of All Heaven looked at Meng Hao with flickering eyes. Then he pushed his hands out, causing the mountain to fly toward Meng Hao at top speed, emanating intense pressure. It was a dazzling energy that could crush anything and everything. The immortal version of All Heaven flickered, suddenly appearing on top of the peak of the mountain as it rumbled down toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao looked up at the descending mountain and could sense the terrifying pressure coming from it, something that vastly exceeded the power of the heavenly god. The heavenly god could injure Meng Hao and even crush his bones. However, it couldn't harm his deepest foundation. On the other hand, the power crushing down on him from this immortal mountain caused even his Tao essence to tremble. A man and a mountain, that's the immortal. Fine. Since you're revealing the immortal, then the time has come for me to show you my hexing magic combination. Eyes filled with ultimate determination, Meng Hao waved his sleeve, performing an incantation gesture which caused his cultivation base to erupt with power. Then, hexing magic towered up. First hex. Second hex. Third hex. Fourth hex. Fifth hex. Sixth hex. 6 hexes all combined. The combined power of the hexing magics unleashed a paramount power, the power of the League of Demon Sealers, the power to seal heaven and earth, the power to seal everything which existed. 6 hexing magics combined into one, transforming into a gigantic hand. That hand only had 4 fingers but burst with unheard-of shocking power. Without the slightest pause, the hand rose up to meet the man and the mountain, to kill the immortal. Chapter 1584, 6 hexes combined. /expand. The enormous hand rose up toward the man and the mountain. The person and the mountain made the immortal. As for Meng Hao, he used the power of transcendence to combine 6 hexes into one. What resulted was a power that could shock all living things. It became a hand that seemed capable of ripping apart the entire starry sky. All of this happened in the time it takes a lightning bolt to strike. In fact, other than Meng Hao himself, no one could clearly see what had happened as All Heaven's clone transformed into the immortal. All they could see was a huge hand slamming into a mountain. In that instant, everything cracked and crumbled, the starry sky was thrown into chaos, and the void shattered. Cracking sounds filled the starry sky, and rifts snaked out from the spot where the hand met the mountain, gaping chasms that were like vicious dragons, roaring as they spread out in all directions. The starry sky of the vast expanse was like a mirror, which was now cracking into so many pieces that it seemed as if it might shatter at any moment. All cultivators felt blood oozing out of their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths. They began to back up, trembling with more astonishment and fear than they could ever have imagined. When the demon sealing hexing magic met the immortal, it was one of the most powerful interchanges which had ever occurred within the starry sky of the vast expanse. A boom rang out that burst countless eardrums. The enormous hand formed from the combined 6 hexes shattered into fragments. However, before they could disperse, Meng Hao waved his hand, and they began to sweep back in his direction, becoming a raging tempest. Within that tempest, Meng Hao's hair whipped about his head, and his eyes shone with strange light as he stared coldly at the mountain and the man. Currently, the mountain was shaking violently, as a spiderweb of cracks expanded out over its surface. Rumbling sounds echoed out. This was an immortal mountain, and yet it couldn't hold on any longer. It began to collapse, and as it did, the immortal version of All Heaven's clone coughed up a massive mouthful of blood. His expression was one of madness as he backed up 8 paces. Meng Hao, things aren't finished yet, he shrieked. Then his hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, causing the rubble of the destroyed immortal mountain to swirl toward him. In the blink of an eye, it surrounded him and began to fuse with him. It was impossible to say whether the mountain was absorbing the man, or the man was absorbing the mountain. They fused together, and an unprecedentedly powerful burst of immortal chi emanated out in all directions. Now, what was standing in front of Meng Hao was completely different from before. He was a man and bore the shape of a man, and yet he was actually a mountain. He was the fusion between a man and a mountain. He was the true, immortal. Crushing pressure, he roared. This man-mountain combination began to spin as it shot toward Meng Hao, emanating intense, crushing pressure. This time the energy was even more intense than before. This time the momentum was even more astonishing. As he closed in, Meng Hao's eyes flickered with cold light. He licked his lips and then waved his hand, causing the tempest around him to spin with even more speed than before. Then it began to form together in front of him in the shape of a blade. 6 hexing magics were combined into the saber of the demon sealers. It was matchlessly sharp, and as soon as it took form, it caused all other magical and divine weapons in the starry sky of the vast expanse to tremble. Some magical items even cracked and began to crumble. This saber was clearly the type of weapon that all other weapons would prostrate in worship to. Want to die? I can accommodate you. Eyes flickering with shocking killing intent, Meng Hao blurred into motion, snatching the saber and slashing it viciously toward All Heaven's clone. It was a blow that could shake the vault of existence, that could shock the starry sky. It was filled with completely unprecedented, dazzling power. BOOMM. It was the most powerful blow Meng Hao had ever struck. His cultivation base erupted with power, and transcendent fleshly body and soul combined with the essence of his Tao. He was half a step into the ancestor realm, and he was holding back nothing in this attack. The blade descended, and All Heaven's clone howled in fury as he fought back with all of the power he could muster. Immortal chi surged, and yet, despite having the immortal body of the 6th transformation, he was still incapable of defending against the transcendent Meng Hao's 6 combined demon-sealing hexing magics. As the blade slashed down, dazzling light flickered, and Meng Hao and All Heaven spun away from each other. When Meng Hao turned back, his eyes shone with cold light, whereas All Heaven's clone looked completely shocked. He looked down at his body to see a gaping wound slashed across his torso. Before he could even say anything, his upper half toppled over as he was split in two. One half of him crumbled into the rocks which had formed the immortal mountain, while the other half of him remained the man portion of the immortal. However, that portion was incredibly weak and even emanated the feeling of decay. When he looked back at Meng Hao, his expression was one of dread, and he began to back up. Unexpectedly, he was attempting to flee. He had no other choice. He had already unleashed all of the transformations he could. 6 was the limit that this clone could safely utilize. Only his true form could fight with more transformations than that. As he backed up, the crumbling rocks which had formed the immortal mountain began to swirl back up toward him, as if to flee with him. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever, although the truth was that this battle had been very taxing. And yet, after all the incredible fighting, how could he possibly let his opponent simply flee? "Since you've sent this clone to me, I think I'll just keep him," he said. With that he reached out and waved his hand, causing bright red light to erupt out of him. Shockingly, he was unleashing the Blood Demon Grand Magic. For the Blood Demon Grand Magic to be unleashed by a transcendent cultivator was something completely terrifying. In fact, it was something that not even the Blood Demon himself could have comprehended. Meng Hao instantly transformed into a crimson sea which soared out to pursue All Heaven's clone, first covering over the crumbled immortal mountain. Instantly, the chunks of the immortal mountain began to be absorbed. In a shocking turn of events, Meng Hao completely consumed them. These chunks of the immortal mountain had been part of the immortal, and could in fact be considered to be part of All Heaven's clone. They were part of his quintessence, and now they were being absorbed by Meng Hao's Blood Demon Grand Magic. As a result, Meng Hao's cultivation base began to rise dramatically. Chapter 1585, Consuming All Heaven. Chapter 1586, I Am the Heavens. As his cultivation base rose, Meng Hao's divine sense also experienced terrifying growth. It doubled, tripled, quadrupled, and kept going. His fleshly body had already reached a pinnacle in the past, but now that he was absorbing the quintessence of all heaven, it broke through and became even stronger. It was the same with his soul, which was undergoing unprecedented enhancement. Meng Hao threw his head back and roared. His eyes were bright red, and his breath came in ragged pants as he felt himself growing through his consumption of all heaven. Slowly but surely, he was advancing toward the complete ancestor realm. He was consuming all heaven, the lord of the starry sky of the vast expanse. The killing intent in Meng Hao's eyes burned as the sea of blood expanded, sucking in more fragments of the immortal mountain. In sharp contrast to what was happening with Meng Hao, All Heaven's clone was screaming shrilly because of the feeling of being absorbed. It was something he had never felt before, and it left him trembling. He knew with absolute certainty that there was no way for him to escape, not while he was inside of the vast expanse. With his true form being outside of the vast expanse, there was nowhere inside that he could flee to. Before this battle began, he had been able to theorize about how powerful Meng Hao was, but had never been able to imagine being defeated by him. It was all thanks to the fatal blow delivered by the combined 6 hexes. All Heaven's clone knew that he was in grave danger. As he watched Meng Hao rapidly devouring the rubble of the immortal mountain, he threw his head back and howled, "I'm All Heaven. I'm the Lord of the starry sky." In that moment, he ceased any attempts to flee. Eyes bright red, he stabbed his hands into his chest and began to rip it open. As his chest was torn asunder, endless vast expanse mist began to pour out, churning and seething with indescribable power. Shockingly, within that mist were 9 mountains and 9 seas. 7th All Heaven transformation. Mountains and seas become the demon. As the shrill cry of All Heaven's clone echoed out, his body began to vanish. His life force, his will, and his thoughts all formed together. Something was created from nothing as all of those things poured into the mountain and sea realm. Rumbling echoed out as All Heaven transformed into the mountain and sea realm, which then hovered there in the starry sky. Because the mountain and sea realm still existed, the fact that All Heaven had transformed into it meant that he was connected to the real version. If he were harmed, it could affect the real mountain and sea realm. By this point, Meng Hao in blood sea form had absorbed the last bit of rubble from the immortal mountain, and his cultivation base had finished rising. The sea of blood then shrank down until it was a crimson, humanoid mass. Eventually, Meng Hao's facial features became clear. He hovered there, causing the starry sky around him to tremble as he sent out his will to replace that of All Heaven. Now Meng Hao was the lord of this part of the starry sky. 7th transformation. Mountain and sea transformation. Meng Hao's eyes glinted with a glow like that of blood as he contemplated the previous 4 transformations. The 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th transformations had been that of the ghost, the devil, the god, and the immortal. Therefore, it was no surprise that the 7th transformation would be that of the demon. However, that transformation was actually incomplete. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the all-heaven version of the mountain and sea realm, complete with 9 boundless seas and 9 towering mountains, radiated intense power as it shot toward Meng Hao. The 9 seas joined forces to crush Meng Hao. The 9 mountains united to smash him. Meng Hao faced the 9 mountains and 9 seas, then waved his hand out in front of him and coolly said, "Demon sealing hex, 7th hex, karmic hexing." Even as the words left his mouth, countless karma threads appeared upon the all-heaven version of the mountain and sea realm. There were so many of them that any person who could actually see them would be thoroughly shocked. Meng Hao, on the other hand, didn't seem surprised at all. Eyes glittering, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, then pointed out at the incoming mountains. "Seal the karma of the mountains," he said, his words filled with the power of magic. His cultivation base erupted, causing an enormous invisible blade to appear, a blade which could sever karma. That blade shot toward the 9 mountains, not to slash into the mountains themselves, but rather to sever the karma which connected them to the real mountain and sea realm. BOOMM. The blade flashed and the karma was severed. The 9 mountains trembled, then began to collapse into fragments. All Heaven screamed in defiance, but was completely and utterly incapable of doing anything. "Seal the karma of the seas." Meng Hao's hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, and then he waved his finger again, this time at the 9 seas. The 9 seas began to tremble, and yet no matter how they wanted to fight back, not even a single wave could be seen on their surfaces. They had been suppressed to the ultimate degree. Their connection to the true mountain and sea realm was completely severed away. "No," All Heaven's cry rang out into the starry sky, filling the hearts of all living beings. He wanted to fight back, to struggle, to resist. He simply couldn't believe that his 7th transformation could be defeated so easily. That 7th transformation might not be complete, and might only have been unleashed by his clone, but it was still incredibly powerful. How could he ever have imagined that Meng Hao could defeat the 7th transformation as easily as flipping over a hand? His bitter cry rang out as the mountains and seas collapsed. His humanoid shape once again appeared, which was the very moment Meng Hao had been waiting for. "Seal all karma connecting you to the starry sky of the vast expanse," he said, his eyes glittering with light as cold as the deepest winter night. "Henceforth, Your true form may exist outside of the vast expanse, but you may not step even half a pace inside. Neither your body nor your soul may enter. As of this moment, my will has replaced yours." Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, drawing upon the ultimate power of karmic hexing, and then shoved his hand out. That movement caused the mountains and seas to shatter. At the same time, an invisible blade slashed into All Heaven's clone form. His body was destroyed, and his connection to the starry sky of the vast expanse completely severed. A huge boom echoed out, causing the starry sky to tremble. When All Heaven's connection was severed, Meng Hao's will exploded out, replacing All Heaven's, taking complete control of the starry sky within the vast expanse. In that moment, all life forms could sense that the heavens were about to be altered. The clone of All Heaven has been cut down. Henceforth, within the vast expanse, I am the heavens. He waved his sleeve, causing a burst of power to spread out. It was power not from Meng Hao, but from the actual starry sky of the vast expanse. Power like that was different from the power of Meng Hao's transcendence. However, considering the look of terror on All Heaven's face, it was obvious that such power was still incredible. It was at this point that the trembling and crumbling clone of All Heaven suddenly looked over at Meng Hao, then threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Chapter 1587, Starry Sky of the Mountains and Seas. Back when I was in my prime, I laced the starry sky of the vast expanse with a curse. The ghost could not see it. The devil was not qualified to activate it. Even the god didn't trigger it. But today you will see it, Meng Hao. You will see it. It is a curse fueled by the power of my true form, unleashed by the last scrap of my will within the starry sky of the vast expanse. It is my curse, created countless years ago. In response to All Heaven's words, Meng Hao's pupils constricted and his heart began to pound. Clearly, All Heaven was not simply trying to sound mysterious and impressive. He had no reason to do such a thing. His words revealed a very disturbing truth. If this so-called curse had been created during All Heaven's prime, then considering the current level of Meng Hao's cultivation base, it would most likely be impossible for him to break it. In his prime, All Heaven had commanded terrifying, unimaginable power. In fact, he was so powerful that neither the ghost, the devil, nor the god had been able to do anything more than destroy one of his fingers. Meng Hao's eyes began to widen. All Heaven's connection to the starry sky of the vast expanse was utterly and thoroughly severed. Even still, though, Meng Hao could not prevent a sense of dread from seeping into his heart. He was not disheartened, though. Although he wasn't sure about the exact nature of the curse, he was sure it had something to do with karma. Therefore, as long as he was willing to pay the price, he should be able to fight back against it. Even All Heaven at his prime would not be able to kill him with just a curse. Meng Hao's face was very grim as the crumbling, vanishing All Heaven spoke in a voice that seemed to contain bizarre and mysterious power. "Any person who kills me." Unexpectedly, his words began to resonate with the entire starry sky. Shockingly, despite the fact that Meng Hao had completely severed All Heaven's connection to the starry sky of the vast expanse, he was still able to form a resonance with it. That caused Meng Hao's expression to become even grimmer than before. "Shall find that his people, his bloodlines, everyone connected to him by karma, everything connected to the karma of those people, and anyone connected to that greater web of karma, will be cursed. It will spread from this one point outwards, and it will spread yet again from those it spreads to, on and on until it has nowhere left to spread. Everyone within that range, everything within that scope, all lives, shall be cursed by All Heaven. My curse upon them is thus: in their lives time is limited. No type of cultivation magic, no type of bloodline power, no type of precious material, no type of reincarnation will be even slightly effective in breaking the curse. Because the curse does not affect transcendent cultivators, it can exist for all eternity." As All Heaven's words rang out, it was clear that he was speaking them in the present, and yet somehow it seemed as if they were being spoken countless years in the past. In fact, if one listened closely, it almost seemed like two different voices, one in the past, one in the present, joining together, melding, causing everything to shake. Furthermore, it seemed as if the resonance with the starry sky wasn't being formed by All Heaven's current power, but rather by the All Heaven of the past when he was in his prime. He had created this curse countless years ago, then buried it, where it had remained hidden until this day. After the words were spoken, All Heaven looked at the shock on Meng Hao's face and laughed mockingly. Then his body exploded. All Heaven's clone, the former lord of the entire starry sky of the vast expanse, was dead in body and soul. From this moment on, all heaven's true form could exist only in the void outside of the vast expanse. It would be impossible for him to come inside the vast expanse, regardless of what power he unleashed. Meng Hao had become the heavens, and because of that there would be only one voice inside the vast expanse, one will. And that was the will of Meng Hao. Meng Hao looked grimly at the spot where all heaven had exploded. Countless motes of light could be seen there, and instead of fading away they began to shoot toward Meng Hao. He was now the ultimate lord of the starry sky, so as the motes fused into him, rumbling sounds echoed out, and his soul experienced incredible growth. In the blink of an eye, his soul, his fleshly body, and his cultivation base all reached an unprecedented level of power. Most importantly, his Tao essence, the essence of the world which he had created inside of him, also experienced exponential growth. After fully absorbing the clone of all heaven, that world inside of him lit up with dazzling light, and life began to flourish there. As of this moment, he was no longer half a step into the ancestor realm. He had taken that final step and was fully within the ancestor realm. In the ancestor realm, one's body became a world with its own starry sky. Meng Hao's will spread out, filling the starry sky of the vast expanse. He saw all the living creatures and looked at them silently as he contemplated the curse of all heaven. After a long moment he spoke. I am the demon sovereign. In that moment, all cultivators within the starry sky of the vast expanse felt their minds trembling as a voice that contained the weight of the heavens spoke to them. Countless individuals dropped down to their knees to kowtow. The people of innumerable planets, land masses, and worlds all offered worship, as did the countless beings who had been involved in the war. From this moment on, the starry sky of the vast expanse will no longer contain any mist. As soon as the words left Meng Hao's mouth, the entire starry sky cleared of mist. Everything trembled as it simply vanished. Within the space of a few breaths of time, not a single bit could be seen anywhere within the vast expanse. Brilliantly lit planets suddenly became visible, as well as a boundless, majestic starry sky. All living beings were profoundly shaken. From this moment on, the starry sky of the vast expanse will have a new name. It will be called the starry sky of the mountains and seas. With that, he waved his sleeve, and boundless life force spread out. Suddenly, the river of time appeared, along with the giant crocodilian creature, who immediately prostrated in worship. Countless motes of light began to fly out from the river, as everyone from the vast expanse school army who had died in the fighting was resurrected. Having accomplished this, Meng Hao turned and headed off into the distance. Behind him, the voices of the vast expanse school's army joined together in a powerful cry. I respect demon sovereign. I respect demon sovereign. As the vast expanse school cultivators cried out, the other living beings from the other parts of the starry sky all prostrated to the heavens. I respect demon sovereign. The sound echoed out in astonishing fashion. For a cultivator to have reached this level was like reaching the ultimate peak. And yet Meng Hao felt no joy. His heart only continued to sink as he contemplated the curse of all heaven. He slowly strolled through the starry sky until he found the location where the mountain and sea realm had once stood. Expand. In the same moment that Meng Hao became the lord of the starry sky of the vast expanse, and then changed its name to the starry sky of the mountains and seas, in the boundless ruins outside, an eye appeared. As the eye opened, countless surrounding ruins outside the vast expanse collapsed, creating a world of dust. Only the eye remained, unmoving, bloodshot, looking off into the distance. That eye seemed to contain an unmatched fury, and yet, deep within that fury was terror. That eye was none other than all heaven's true form. In the past, all heaven's flesh and blood had vanished, leaving behind only 5 fingers. Of those 5 fingers, 3 had been destroyed. The final 2 remained intact. However, because of the rise of Meng Hao, the finger which represented the demon had experienced dramatic withering. A similar fate had befallen the finger representing the immortal. As for this eye, it was clearly much weaker than it had been before Meng Hao had transcended. After a moment a weak voice spoke, seemingly dragged and stretched out, distorted and filled with hatred. Meng Hao. If events had played out according to all heaven's plan, things would not have turned out this way. Meng Hao would not have transcended, but instead would have become the 99th demon seed. All heaven would have absorbed him, and the power of nirvanic rebirth within the all heaven bloodline, along with the multifarious magic of the demon, would have enabled all heaven to craft a new body for himself. At that time, he would have been able to free himself from his ruined and withered body. He would have been able to appear once again within the starry sky with an even longer lifespan than before. Instead, one thing after another went wrong. Now that his clone had been destroyed, severed away from him, he was unable to enter the vast expanse. He could only wait outside, wait for Meng Hao. The enormous eye was now so bloodshot it was bright red, and the hate which festered inside of it became icy cold, killing intent. There is still a chance to succeed. After a very long moment passed, the eye slowly closed, vanishing. Back within the starry sky of the mountains and seas, Meng Hao continued to contemplate the curse of all heaven with furrowed brow. He sent his will out, performed auguries, and yet was unable to detect any clues. The curse of all heaven from when he was at his prime, Meng Hao sighed. By this point, he had reached the former location of the mountain and sea realm, a huge vortex which had previously teemed with life, but was now empty and gray. Meng Hao looked at the spot fondly for a moment before waving his right hand. Instantly, dots of light appeared within the vortex, light that teemed with the power of life, like countless burning stars. Soon, all areas within the vortex teemed with life, and the entire vortex was shining with dazzling, brilliant colors. This was where the mountain and sea realm had existed in the past, and now it would exist there again. Meng Hao reached out and stretched open his palm. Scintillating light flickered as his newly created transcendence treasure appeared, the brand new mountain and sea realm. It slowly floated down to hover just above the vortex. Inside the mountain and sea realm, all of the cultivators were bursting with excitement. Some even flew out to observe the vortex personally, whereupon tears welled up in their eyes. This is the mountain and sea realm spot within the starry sky. This is our true home. I was born in the mountain and sea realm, and this was where the mountain and sea realm was born. Home. We're back. The people of the mountains and seas are back. Kesidigarbha gazed at the vortex and simply couldn't suppress his excitement. Grandpa Meng, Fang Yu, Fatty, Wang Yaokai, as well as all of Meng Hao's other friends and relatives had similar reactions. As everyone looked on in excitement, Meng Hao took a deep breath, then extended his right hand and pushed it down. That motion affected only the vortex, not Meng Hao or the others in the mountain and sea realm. Everyone watched as time began to flow backward, and the vortex slowly reverted to its previous gray color. Then centuries passed. Meng Hao and everyone watching could eventually see the mountain and sea butterfly. Countless scenes played out. Hearts began to pound as the events of the war could be seen. By now, people were starting to guess at what Meng Hao was about to do. This is where the mountain and sea realm first appeared, he said softly, looking at the images. And now we've returned. Everything that was lost, everything that faded away into time, everything that was parted from us will now return. By the power of my name, I reach out to everyone who died here, to everyone who lost their lives defending the mountain and sea realm, and call them back. With that, he waved his sleeve, causing the stars to tremble. The power of the starry sky of the mountains and seas filled the area, transforming into numerous heaven-shaking, earth-shattering hands which reached out into the images of the past. One by one, everyone who had died in the past was then pulled out. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the first person emerged. It was none other than Shui Dongliu. In the moment before he exploded, he was rescued. After being pulled out of the vortex, he hovered there in the starry sky, shocked, a blank look on his face. It was as if what was occurring completely exceeded his imagination. Even the half of him that was the morning death soul seemed hard-pressed to believe what was happening. More and more people appeared, more and more familiar faces. One by one, they were extracted from vortex of the past, to appear there floating in the starry sky, where they looked around in shocked silence. The mountain and sea lords, the nine seas god worlds, the sublime flow sword grottos, the immortal ancient Taoist rites, and countless other sects. There was the imperial Li clan from planet South Heaven. There were many, many other individuals. Meng Hao waved his finger, and a powerful but gentle force grabbed a hold of Paragon Sea Dream, pulling her out to join the crowd. All the mountain and sea realm cultivators were panting, their eyes as wide as saucers as they watched the events unfold. As soon as Li Linger caught sight of Paragon Sea Dream, tears began to stream down her face. Fatty saw his master who had died in the fighting and began to tremble. Wang Yaokai, Xixiang. Everyone was equally excited. They're being resurrected. Master, Dad, Mom, you're alive again. My sect, all my fellow disciples, you're all back. People were weeping and laughing. All cultivators of the mountain and sea realm who were capable of flight immediately flew over to their resurrected family and friends, calling out in joy and excitement. The resurrected ones were panting, looking around in complete incredulity. And yet, it was no dream. Paragon C Dream looked at Li Linger and then slowly turned her head. When she saw Meng Hao hovering there like a deity, a smile broke out on her face. After a moment of silence, Shui Dongliu shook his head, then began to laugh at the top of his lungs. Chapter 1588, Resurrecting Old Friends. Chapter 1589, Time is Limited. Glittering lights filled the vortex that was the home of the mountain and sea realm as more and more familiar faces were resurrected. Cheering could be heard everywhere as countless people who had fought in the war were now returned to life. An old man appeared who was none other than Grandpa Fang. As soon as Meng Hao caught sight of him, a tremor ran through him, and he immediately rushed forward and kowtowed respectfully, tears streaming down his face. Grandpa Fang looked around in confusion, but then saw Meng Hao, and a smile broke out on his face. The truth was that years ago, he had accomplished the final mission given to him by Shui Dongliu, which had been to infiltrate the 33 heavens and cause their land masses to collide against each other. That was when he had truly died. Laughing, he helped his beloved grandson to his feet. It was in that exact same moment that someone else emerged from within the vortex. As soon as she appeared, many people recognized her. She had once been the divine daughter of the Nine Seas god world, Fan Donger. Actually, she hadn't died in the war. The white-robed corpse which accompanied her had dragged her down into the very depths of the void. Now she emerged, trembling, looking over at Meng Hao, and then all the other people she knew, and all the people who were being resurrected. Tears streamed down her face. As more people were brought back to life, the other excited cultivators explained everything which had happened in the past centuries. Eventually, after everyone had been resurrected, Meng Hao waved his hand again, and the vortex began to spin. Soon it was whizzing at top speed, and Meng Hao's eyes were glowing with powerful light. Back when he had only been half a step into the ancestor realm, there had been a certain person he had wished to resurrect but could not, a person who had come to be part of his heart long ago. But now he had consumed All Heaven's clone and stepped fully into the ancestor realm. Although he was not yet fully familiar with all of his powers, he was definitely far, far more powerful than he had been in the past. Considering the current level of his cultivation base, it was even possible for him to resurrect people from ancient times. "Foster father," he said softly, gesturing at the vortex. Time flowed backward within the vortex, causing images to flit by until the ancient demon immortal sect appeared. No one was more moved by the sight than Qi Jiusi, who trembled visibly as he looked at the vortex. The sight of the ancient demon immortal sect caused great waves of emotion to batter his heart. They were emotions that could not be understood by anyone who hadn't experienced the loss of a father. "Dad," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture, then gestured once more with his finger. The vortex grew still as an ancient figure appeared. Gradually, his features became clear. It was Qi Yunhai. Slowly, Qi Yunhai was pulled out from the vortex to join everyone else. Meng Hao had reached back countless years into the past to resurrect Qi Yunhai. As Qi Yunhai hovered there, a blank look on his face, Qi Jiusi rushed forward, tears streaming down his face. He immediately dropped to his knees in front of his father. "Dad." Meng Hao also hurried forward. Taking a deep breath, he fell to his knees in front of Qi Yunhai. "Foster father." Qi Yunhai looked blankly at Qi Jiusi and then closed his eyes. After a moment passed, they opened again, and he seemed to understand. A warm smile appeared on his face. Then he looked over at Meng Hao and began to laugh. It was an unbelievable event within the starry sky of the mountains and seas. Everyone who had died in the war came back to life. By the time he was finished, Meng Hao, despite his incredible power, was very tired. But when he looked at the excited, happy cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, he felt joy in his heart. He placed the new mountain and sea realm back into the place where the old one had existed. The newly resurrected individuals were taken by their family and friends back into the mountain and sea realm, where they continued to learn about the events which had occurred in the centuries after their demise. Time passed. Meng Hao didn't travel around through the starry sky, but instead stayed in the mountain and sea realm, with Su Qing, with his father and mother, and with Qi Yunhai. The new mountain and sea realm continued to grow and develop. Within the 9 mountains and seas, the mountain and sea cultivators made new homes for themselves and cultivated the magic of Meng Hao's League of Demon Sealers. The starry sky was quiet. The cultivators of the Vast Expanse School returned to planet Vast Expanse, and as for all of the other living creatures, they also returned to their respective homes. All cultivators knew that the place where they lived was no longer called the vast expanse. It was the starry sky of the mountains and seas. The will of the starry sky was not all heaven, it was Meng Hao. Meng Hao was the lord of the starry sky. Because of that, the mountain and sea realm became the ultimate power within the starry sky, and was like a holy land. Days passed, years passed, few people ever saw Meng Hao. He stayed in the mountain and sea realm on the ninth mountain where he lived quietly. 500 years went by in a flash. During those 500 years, Meng Hao seemed calm, but the truth was that he was constantly thinking about the curse which had been pronounced by all heaven. There was one part which made him especially anxious, which had left a deep impression on him, and that was when all heaven said, "Time is limited." Meng Hao wanted to change things. He wanted to break the curse created by all heaven when he was in his prime. But no matter what methods he attempted during those 500 years, he could do nothing of the sort. Despite being in the ancestor realm, he was a far cry from all heaven in his prime. Because of that gap, the curse could not be broken. During the 500 years which passed, generation after generation of mountain and sea realm cultivators were born. As time passed, Meng Hao intentionally began to erase the evidence of his existence. He forbade people from talking about him or spreading stories, hoping that such a tactic would reduce the number of people who were connected to him by karma. However, that was a difficult task to accomplish. After all, the most vile aspect of the curse was that it didn't just affect people who were connected to Meng Hao by karma, but people connected by 2 degrees and on. The effects spread far and wide, and could not be negated. During the 500 years, the mountain and sea realm continued to thrive, and yet there were also strange things which occurred, things which could not be ignored. For example, generally speaking, nascent soul cultivators were supposed to be able to live for 400 or 500 years, but now that number had decreased to around 200. Furthermore, some cultivators who should clearly have been able to live for much longer gradually weakened. Their longevity wasted away, and eventually, people began to die. However, the general growth and expansion of the realm ensured that such things went unnoticed, except by Meng Hao. He noticed. Whenever a person died in such a fashion, he would appear by their corpse. Every single one of the corpses whose longevity had been severed had traces of the curse on them. Time is limited, he thought bitterly. Eventually, the day came when people he actually knew began to show the withering signs of age. By now, Meng Hao was getting very anxious. He did everything he could think of. He used magical techniques. He created countless new natural laws. He did everything possible to weaken the power of the curse, and yet he was unable to break it. Because of what was happening, he even went outside the vast expanse. After all, since the curse had been cast by all heaven, then all heaven was the one who could break it. However, even after utilizing all of the power of his divine sense, he was unable to find all heaven's true form. Apparently he was hiding, unwilling to fight the final battle with Meng Hao. Even though all heaven's true form was also weakening because of that, he still didn't appear. Meng Hao searched the area outside the vast expanse for a very, very long time. In the end, he could only chuckle bitterly, well aware that the reason all heaven hadn't appeared was because he wanted to see the limitations of time be inflicted on everyone Meng Hao was close to. Meng Hao returned to the starry sky of the mountains and seas, and the ninth mountain. There, he went mad trying to create new natural laws that could break the curse. When Su Qing saw him like this, her heart filled with pain, but there was nothing she could do to help. She could only accompany him silently. "Time is limited," he murmured. "Because of that, there is no reincarnation. One life is the end." He had already come to realize that anyone who ever had anything to do with him would not be reincarnated after dying. Time flowed by. Another 500 years passed. It had already been 1,000 years since Meng Hao had become the lord of the mountain and sea realm. During those 1,000 years, concerted effort resulted in fewer and fewer people knowing about him. It was in the 1,000th year that Paragon Sea Dream passed away again. Her death was a huge blow to Meng Hao's heart. He stood quietly, looking at her corpse and the flickering soul fire in his palm, which was all that remained of her. He quickly took that soul fire and sealed it, turning into a fist-sized block of ice. It was a soul seed, Paragon Sea Dream's soul, which he had extracted in the last moment before she had died. Over the course of the past 1,000 years, this was the only method he had been able to devise. He transformed the dead into soul seeds, which he hoped to send back into the cycle of reincarnation after breaking the curse. Li Linger was heartbroken by the departure of Sea Dream. After the 1,000 years which had passed, she was now older than ever. The sight of Paragon Sea Dream's corpse caused Meng Hao to sigh bitterly. Years ago, he had brought everyone back to life, but now, there was nothing he could do other than watch the effects of the curse spread. After Paragon Sea Dream died, Meng Hao returned to the ninth mountain. There, he had erected a special mountain of ice in which to store the soul seeds. At the moment, it was possible to see tens of thousands of them, and it was easy to imagine how many more would come to fill it in the future. Eventually, more and more people would die, and he would be the only one remaining alive. The mere thought left his heart quivering in fear. He held Su Qing quietly in his arms, looking off into the distance. It didn't matter that he was in the ancestor realm, he was still powerless to do anything. More years passed, and Meng Hao went outside the vast expanse for a second time. He searched relentlessly, examining everything in detail in ways that surpassed his previous efforts exponentially. In the end, though, he never found all heaven. Eventually, he came to hover in the starry sky outside the vast expanse. It was almost as if he could hear all heaven laughing, a cold laughter filled with venom and hatred. He remained there for some time before returning to the starry sky of the mountains and seas. However, he didn't go to the ninth mountain. He had sensed something within his will, someone calling out to him from planet Vast Expanse. He vanished, and when he reappeared, he was there above planet Vast Expanse. Down below was a sprawling desert within which was an oasis, where a woman was looking up at him. She seemed dazzled but quickly dropped to her knees to kowtow. "Greetings, demon sovereign." Meng Hao floated down and landed in front of her. She was old now, and even the fact that she was a nine essences paragon couldn't hide the aura of decay which existed upon her. She was immortal by Wuchen. Back then, she had requested of Meng Hao that he take her outside the vast expanse, to her home. Now she was calling upon him, bowing to him, once again making her plea. "Outside the vast expanse there is nothing but ruins," Meng Hao said quietly. It wasn't that he didn't want to accommodate her. Unfortunately, what existed within Bai Wuchen's memories was an illusion. Immortal Bai Wuchen was quiet for a moment, then gritted her teeth and looked up. "Ruins or not, I want to go." Meng Hao closed his eyes for a moment, then sighed. Opening his eyes, he waved his hand, and a vortex appeared next to Bai Wuchen. Immediately, she disappeared into it, on her way to the area outside the vast expanse. "See for yourself," he said. "If you want to come back, just call upon my name." He stood there in the oasis for a moment, looking at the spot where immortal Bai Wuchen had disappeared. Then he looked over at the ninth continent and the ninth sect. As of this very moment, there was a young woman there who was the center of all attention, standing at the very peak of the tallest tower. Bells were tolling throughout the sect. That young woman was perfect. When Meng Hao looked at her, it was with warmth and love. Perfect knew about her past. Meng Hao had visited her 1,000 years ago to explain everything. He had given her a choice: remain in the ninth sect or return with him to the mountain and sea realm. She had chosen to remain where she was. Although he had never personally returned to planet Vast Expanse during the 1,000 years which had passed, he had often sent his will to watch over Perfect. Every time he saw her, he would think about a woman sleeping in a coffin in the Violet Fate sect on planet South Heaven. As he looked over at his daughter standing there at the peak of the world, he looked especially bleak. Then he saw her smiling, and he also smiled. It was a lonely smile that lasted for a long moment. Eventually, he turned and left. Time passed, another 1,000 years. By now, over 2,000 years had passed since Meng Hao had founded the starry sky of the mountains and seas. After all the time which had passed, few people remembered who he was. A situation arose which was very similar to the situation when Meng Hao had made his rise in the world of cultivation. Few people knew that the will of the starry sky actually had a name: Meng Hao. During those 1,000 years, the power of the curse grew especially potent. One by one, all of the cultivators he had resurrected from the past began to die. Although it appeared on the surface that it was simply a matter of their longevity coming to an end, leading them to a natural death, Meng Hao knew that they should have been able to live longer. And although they should not have been able to live forever, they should at least have been able to enter the cycle of reincarnation. But now they only had one life to live. Meng Hao often wondered what would have happened if he hadn't resurrected all of them. But in the end, he realized that even if he hadn't resurrected them, they still wouldn't have been able to enter reincarnation. The power of this curse enabled Meng Hao to finally comprehend how strong all heaven had been in his prime. Thankfully, he did resurrect them. Thankfully, he was able to spend some time with them before they died. Thankfully, He was able to take their soul seeds and place them in the ice mountain. Every time he looked at the growing collection of soul seeds, he felt a wave of bitterness wash through him. One year, Lilinger closed her eyes and never opened them. One year, Xianxia, her hair as white as frost, ran out of longevity. When Lilinger closed her eyes, Meng Hao and Su Qing were there with her. She was the only surviving member of the Li clan. The rest had all left with Chuman Tai. Even back during the war, she had always chosen to remain with the mountain and sea realm. It was her home. She had never taken a Taoist partner. She died alone. Su Qing cried. Her hair was now graying and her skin was wrinkled. She held Lilinger's hand and her tears fell, splashing like rose petals onto their skin. Chapter 1591. Shui Dongliu's Jade Slip. Jixiang was beautiful. She had been beautiful when she was young, and even in her old age, her hair white, her face full of wrinkles, she was still beautiful. During those 1,000 years, one person after another passed away. Every time someone familiar to him closed their eyes for the final time, Meng Hao's pain grew. Sometimes he laughed bitterly. He could seal the heavens, but when it came to this curse, he was helpless. The curse of all heaven was a torment. It was a torment to whoever had killed him. That person would remain alone for all time, watching time pass, watching the blue seas turn into lush fields. It was a tactic, a scheme. When all heaven grew incredibly weak, he could use that scheming tactic to cause his enemy's heart to rot. It was only by such means that all heaven would have a chance at victory. Meng Hao was well aware of this fact. However, he couldn't simply turn off his feelings. He couldn't disregard what was happening. When his foster father Qi Yunhai eventually grew weak and approached death, he wept. He knelt in front of Qi Yunhai's bed like a child, tears flowing. "Why are you crying?" Qi Yunhai said, his voice soft with love. "I've been able to live for thousands of years. I've been able to spend time with you and with Jiusi. I'm content with that." He reached out and patted Meng Hao's head, and then the light in his eyes slowly faded away. Throughout those 1,000 years, many people died. Overall, though, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm grew strong. Many powerful experts appeared. As for the members of the older generation, as they became aware of the situation with the curse, they also withdrew from the public. Soon, there really was a brand new mountain and sea realm. Wars began. Wars fought between the mountains and seas. Because of the natural laws of the realm, though, such wars were limited in scope. Years passed, another 1,000. One by one, the older cultivators of the mountain and sea realm passed away. K. Siddhigarbha was among them. Before his time came, he went to see Meng Hao and Su Qing. His face was old, and filled with a warmth and kindness that he rarely let others see. The very night he came to see them, he slipped away quietly into death. Next was Grandpa Meng, and after him Grandpa Fang, then Fan Donger. One by one, Meng Hao's fellow clan members died, as did his friends. Each death was like a knife that stabbed him in the heart. By this time, Su Qing's hair was white, and yet she didn't die. Meng Hao fed her with his own blood, which was rich with life force. But that didn't stop her from withering with age. Eventually, it reached the point where she could do little more than lay in bed. Despite that, her tender feelings for Meng Hao never left her eyes. It was as if looking at him for an entire lifetime wasn't enough for her. And yet she didn't seem resentful. Instead, she was content to have been able to spend the past thousands of years with him. The only thing she regretted was that she had not borne him any children. It wasn't that she didn't want to. Rather, she chose not to. She didn't want her own children to suffer under the ravages of the curse. Time turned into a river that flowed by ever so slowly. Another 1,000 years passed. By now, the number of people who had passed away was unthinkable. Countless cultivators of the older generation had returned to the dust. Only a handful of people who had fought in the ancient mountain and sea war remained. Shui Dongliu managed to hold on for thousands of years, but eventually he too was forced to close his eyes in death. Before passing away, he smiled and pressed a jade slip into Meng Hao's palm. Then he looked at Meng Hao, wise and farsighted, light flickering in his eyes. "Don't forget, after you look at that jade slip, commit its contents to heart and then destroy it. They are my deductions regarding the method to lift the curse." After taking the jade slip, Meng Hao collected Shui Dongliu's soul seed and took it to the ice mountain. He examined the jade slip, then destroyed it. The gleam of obsession could be seen deep in his eyes. More time passed. The few people who had managed to hold on for this long were finally succumbing to their longevity. Eventually, Patriarch Reliance chose to enter a state of deep slumber, which would extend his life to an almost unlimited degree. A few hundred years later, one of Meng Hao's immediate family members left him. It was Fang Yu, his older sister. She and Sun Hai had held on for many years, enduring the pain of watching entire generations of their children die one after another. When the last of their beloved offspring passed away, they closed their eyes, held hands, and died together as husband and wife. After collecting their soul strands, Meng Hao stood there quietly for a long time, thinking about past times. He thought about how his sister had always protected him. He didn't realize it, but tears welled up in his eyes until they spilled down his cheeks. Off to the side were his parents, overwhelmed with grief, weeping. Deep in his heart, Meng Hao said, "I swear that I will start the cycle of reincarnation again. For all of you." After Fang Yu and Sun Hai died, 600 years passed. By that time there were only a few people in the mountain and sea realm who remained from that early group. Other than Su Qing, Meng Hao, and Meng Hao's parents, there was Wang Yaokai, Fatty, Dong Hu, and Pill Demon. There was also Chu Yuyan, although she was still unwilling to awaken. Everyone else had returned to the dust, their soul seeds taken away by Meng Hao. Because of Meng Hao's blood, Su Qing barely held on. Meng Hao's parents were sustained because of having fused with the mountain and sea butterfly. Dong Hu managed to hang on because of the miraculous pearl. As for Pill Demon, he was the incarnation of a medicinal pill, and was thus able to endure longer than most. The first to give out was Wang Yaokai. When his longevity ran out, he died laughing. Meng Hao felt stabs of pain in his heart. He placed Wang Yaokai's soul seed in the ice cave, and once again he wept. However, even more painful than the death of Wang Yaokai was Fatty. He and Fatty had been brothers for life. They began to walk the path of cultivation together, all the way down to this day. On the eve of Fatty's death, he was no longer fat. His body had wasted away until he was little more than skin and bones. He had watched all of his wives pass away and all of his sons and daughters. As he lay there quietly looking at Meng Hao, he wanted to laugh but couldn't find the energy. "Fudge, Meng Hao, you have to take out all heaven for me. You have to win. When you finally manage to break the curse and send me into reincarnation, make sure I remember my previous life." Fatty took his last breath and used it to let out a powerful shout. Having expended his last bit of energy, he closed his eyes. That year, many wrinkles appeared on Meng Hao's face. Compared to the mountain and sea realm, far fewer deaths occurred on planet Vast Expanse. Although they did occur, because the karmic connections there were not as deep, it did not affect a significant number of people. As for the few whose karmic connections to Meng Hao were strong, they too would have a limited lifespan. However, since they had such strong cultivation bases, their lifespans had not come to an end as of yet. Furthermore, if they could reach transcendence, then the curse would not affect them. Chapter 1592, same scenery filled with strangers. Gone, everyone had gone. Meng Hao suddenly aged visibly. He returned silently to the ninth mountain, to Su Qing's bedside, who looked very, very old. He looked at her. "Why don't you just let me go?" she said softly, her voice hoarse. Meng Hao shivered but didn't respond. He continued to feed her his blood, which was the only thing keeping her alive. Su Qing went back to sleep. Meng Hao stood there looking at her, his eyes bloodshot. After a long moment passed, he turned and walked out of the room. Gazing up in the sky, his eyes flickered with the light of augury as he once again tried to come up with a way to keep his loved ones alive for longer, something other than the soul seeds. 300 years passed, and Pill Demon died. In that moment, he transformed into a decayed medicinal pill, which was his soul seed. The sight of it left Meng Hao weeping as he thought back to everything which had occurred in the past. He carefully placed the medicinal pill into the ice mountain, checked in on Su Qing, and continued to make augury calculations to try to come up with a solution. 200 years later, Dong Hu's time came. In the moments before death, he gave a pearl to Meng Hao and explained that he had been feeding it for his entire life. He had been preparing it for someone else, and that someone was Meng Hao. As the pearl floated in front of Meng Hao, the parrot flew out. Neither the parrot nor the meat jelly had appeared during the past several thousand years. When they looked at Meng Hao and his grief, they felt that same grief rising up within their own hearts. Unfortunately, there was nothing they could do to help. The parrot took the pearl and placed it into a certain spot on the copper mirror, and the two fused together. Radiant light glittered, and yet Meng Hao didn't pay it any attention. "Gone," he murmured. "They're all gone." He went back to his augury. Time passed. Another 1,000 years. By this point, it had been 7,000 years since Meng Hao had become the Lord of the Starry Sky. During those 7,000 years, he had never made any public appearances. Most people had forgotten his name, and those who did remember had begun to speculate that Meng Hao had left the starry sky. For the most part, people weren't aware of how certain individuals were dying in an unusual fashion. However, there were a few people, like Jin Yunxian and the others on planet Vast Expanse, who did notice. They weren't completely sure, though, and didn't dare to state their speculations out loud. Ambitions rose up in their hearts, but they suppressed them and continued to wait. In the mountain and sea realm on the ninth mountain, Su Qing hovered on the brink of death. Even with Meng Hao's blood, she wouldn't be able to hang on for much longer. The truth was that she should have died long ago. It was at this point that Meng Hao thought about how Patriarch Reliance had intentionally gone into a state of slumber, and suddenly came up with a new idea. He took a trip outside of the starry sky of the mountains and seas, and upon returning, stood there by Su Qing's side for a long moment, his eyes closed. A long moment passed, and he opened his eyes. "Kinger," he said quietly, "close your eyes and sleep. I'll wake you up soon." With that, he reached out and pushed his hand down onto her forehead. She smiled and closed her eyes. She wasn't dead. She continued to breathe as Meng Hao drew upon his personal essence to pour power into her. She gradually reverted from her ancient appearance back to her youthful self. It only took a moment for her to be radiantly beautiful once again. At the same time, an icy coldness passed from Meng Hao's hand into her body. Cracking sounds could be heard as layers of ice formed. Gradually, ice came to cover her completely, forming the shape of a coffin. There Su Qing lay, inside the coffin, sleeping, sealed with ice. This was the final method Meng Hao had devised, something different from the soul seeds which could be sent back into reincarnation. After thousands of years of augury calculations, this was the best method he could come up with, something very taxing to himself, something that used numerous natural laws combined with heaven-sealing magic. He had separated her from the curse. He used ice to create a tiny world the size of a coffin. Whoever slept inside that coffin would be free from the effects of the curse. This method also had something to do with his observations of his own Tao essence and the world which existed inside of him. He had thought of taking people into that world inside of him to separate them from the curse, but was unable. He was in the ancestor realm, and yet that world inside of him was incomplete. He gazed at Su Qing there within the ice coffin, then went to another location on the ninth mountain, where his parents lived. His parents were the only loved ones he had left in the world. After explaining his plan regarding the ice seal, Meng Hao's parents sat there silently. A long time passed before they exchanged a glance, then looked back at Meng Hao and shook their heads. They did not wish to continue living in such a manner. They would rather reach the end of their lives together. After all the years which had passed and everything they had been through, they were content for things to end. Having watched as Meng Hao climbed to the absolute pinnacle, they had no regrets. Meng Hao continued to try to persuade them until his father's temper sparked. Meng Hao lapsed into silence. He could tell that his parents' decision was final. In the following years, he spent as much time as he could with them there in the mountain and sea realm. Another 1,000 years passed. Finally, Meng Hao watched through tear-filled eyes as his parents transformed into the mountain and sea butterfly, and then gradually began to fade away. However, in the moment before it disappeared, Meng Hao's eyes flashed with determination. His right hand flashed in an incantation gesture, and the power of his Tao essence erupted out. Coldness filled the area, and cracking sounds could be heard. In the blink of an eye, the area was completely sealed in ice. The frozen mountain and sea butterfly began to shrink down until it was a coffin, which Meng Hao carefully picked up. He knew that the real reason his parents had refused was that they didn't want him to waste any of his essence power. They were worried that he would harm himself in order to help them. They were willing to sacrifice anything for their son. That was the reason for their decision. But Meng Hao was willing to do the same for his parents. They were the two most important people in his life, and thus he made his own decision. He placed the mountain and sea butterfly's ice coffin next to Su Qing's. Those two coffins contained the people in his life that he simply couldn't part with. Grief, pain, and loneliness rose up like the tide, completely engulfing him. He sat down quietly and let time pass just like it always had. He sat there for 1,000 years. By now, he had been the lord of the starry sky for 10,000 years. Finally, he placed protective seals on the soul seeds in the coffins, then walked out and looked at the mountain and sea realm. Everything looked unfamiliar to him now. "I watched the blue seas become lush fields," he murmured. "Same scenery but filled with strangers." Chapter 1593, Loneliness. Years had passed. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. 5,000 years had gone by in a flash. After 10,000 years in which Meng Hao never appeared in public, his name had largely been forgotten by the successive generations of cultivators. All of the older generation in the mountain and sea realm had returned to the dust, and virtually no one now living had ever even heard of Meng Hao. During the 10,000 years, it wasn't just people in the mountain and sea realm who died. Cultivators passed away in other parts of the starry sky, such as in the vast expanse school, although the effects in those other places weren't as pronounced. In the current starry sky of the mountains and seas, few people were aware that the starry sky even had a will of its own. People even stopped telling stories about the battle 10,000 years before, between Meng Hao and All Heaven. There was a very, very small group of people who remembered, but most of them were paragons. Because the karma connecting them to Meng Hao wasn't very profound, and because of their incredible cultivation bases, the power of the curse didn't affect them in a significant way. After several thousand years, Perfect's longevity eventually ran out. Meng Hao collected her soul seed and sealed it in the ice mountain. That ice mountain contained all of the memories of Meng Hao's entire life. Everyone he cared about, all of the good things were there. That ice cave was also his weak spot. He spent most of his time sitting at the foot of the ice mountain, with only his memories to accompany him. Occasionally he would go out into the mountain and sea realm. However, every time he did, things seemed unfamiliar. He almost felt as if he wasn't even a part of the world anymore. Although he wasn't aware of it, there was something building up within him, something that could only be described by a single word: loneliness, and it was growing stronger. He was the most powerful entity within the starry sky, but the feeling of loneliness only continued to grow. He never aged, and yet he felt more and more tired. His body was not growing older, but his heart was, and he could do nothing to change that. Years marched along within the starry sky, faster and faster. Meng Hao felt as if those years were passing him by. All he could do was sit and watch them go. He looked at the living creatures that existed within the starry sky. He watched generations come and go. He saw gifted and talented individuals rise to glory. He saw people that others would call inhuman. He saw new powerful experts make names for themselves. The mountain and sea realm continued to prosper. Few people bore the mark of the curse anymore. As people forgot Meng Hao, the karma connecting them to him grew faint. Although many of them still had slightly limited longevity, their speed of cultivation was greatly enhanced because of living in the precious treasure that was the mountain and sea realm. In the 9 mountains and seas, the natural laws were based on the 9 great hexing magics of the League of Demon Sealers. Because of that, it was much easier to reach the Tao realm. In fact, throughout the 10,000 years which had passed, numerous outstanding cultivators had risen up. They created cultivation techniques unique to their generation, and also invented many, many new divine abilities. Throughout the millennia, the cultivators from the mountain and sea realm were always considered to be one of the most powerful forces within the starry sky of the mountains and seas. Eventually, wild ambitions began to grow within the hearts of many cultivators. It was hard to say when exactly it began, but eventually they began to expand, and to subjugate one group of life forms after another within the starry sky. Meng Hao watched it happen. He watched the wars being fought. He even strolled through battlefields sometimes, watching the mountain and sea cultivators die, watching the other living beings die. He watched the blood flow and smelled the stench of gore. He watched it all but did nothing. He didn't help either side and certainly didn't fight. This was the path the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had chosen, and he wouldn't interfere. As for exactly how it would all turn out, he wasn't sure. As the mountain and sea realm waged war, its people grew stronger. They encountered many critical situations. To Meng Hao, none of that was very important. The people he cared about were all gone, leaving him alone within heaven and earth. One year, when he went out into the mountain and sea realm, he seemed like an old man. No one could detect his passage, not even the newly arisen paragons of the realm. His destination was planet South Heaven and the Violet Fate Sect. There were only a few things within the starry sky that Meng Hao cared about anymore. One was the gradually weakening patriarch Reliance. The other was in the Violet Fate Sect, where a woman rested in slumber, ever resistant to the idea of awakening. Whenever Meng Hao thought about Chu Yuyan, his expression grew grimmer than usual. Dark clouds filled the sky above planet South Heaven. Snow began to fall, and as the snowflakes accumulated on the various mortal kingdoms down below, the world turned white. Down below on one of the public highways, A horse-drawn carriage sped along through the night. Within the carriage was a scholar, reading a book by the light of an oil lamp. Meng Hao hovered up above, watching the snow fall and watching the carriage speed along across the highway. He looked at the scholar and couldn't help but think of that time he had traveled through a snowy night in the state of Zhao. 1. This is a reference to chapter 58, in which he traveled on a snowy night and met a scholar in a horse-drawn carriage. He sighed and then continued along his way to the Violet Fate sect. The Violet Fate sect was the most illustrious and famous sect on planet South Heaven, filled with countless disciples. Within that sect was a mountain that had once been called a holy land. That mountain had no peak, only a basin. It was a place that, throughout all the countless years which had passed, had come to be a restricted area. Not a single person from the Violet Fate sect had ever set foot inside. The primary rule of the sect was that no one was allowed to go there. Many disciples of the Violet Fate sect had speculated what was inside, and countless rumors existed about the subject. Some of the stories were beautiful, and some were vile. Because of all the rumors, that mountain had become the most mysterious of places. For generation after generation, cultivators had stood guard around that mountain, although none of them knew exactly what they were guarding. They only knew that no one was allowed to climb to the top. If anyone tried to do so, they would reach a certain point halfway up where progress was impossible. Likewise, anyone who looked at the mountain from up above would only see rippling distortions. Years ago, one of the most powerful paragons of the mountain and sea realm had come to the conclusion that an ancient precious treasure was buried there. He even gathered an army to go to the mountain and take away the treasure. However, not even that paragon was able to get more than halfway up the mountain. Because of that, the mountain came to be known, not as a holy land but as a restricted area. It was also the most mysterious location in all of the mountain and sea realm. Meng Hao appeared at the bottom of the mountain and looked up toward the top. This was not his first time coming here. After Su Qing left, and after everyone else he knew had died, he had come to visit. This was actually his third time coming. He quietly took a step forward as he began to climb the mountain. No one saw him, and no one could detect his presence. He walked slowly, taking one step at a time as he headed toward the top. Chapter 1594, Buried Within Time. The top of the mountain looked the same as it always had. It was separate from the world, as beautiful as a painting. As soon as Meng Hao reached the top, he could see a coffin off in the distance, a coffin that was empty. It was not his first time looking at the empty coffin. He had come here after Su Qing slipped into her final slumber, which was when he had discovered that no one occupied the coffin anymore. Chu Yuan had vanished. As for where she had gone to, no one knew, not even Meng Hao. Back when he first made the shocking discovery, he had stood there looking at it, his heart equally empty. Chu Yuan could not have simply left on her own. Considering the level of Meng Hao's cultivation base, and given the fact that he was the lord of the starry sky, he should have been able to detect her presence. But she was nowhere to be found. The only explanation was that she had somehow left when he was making the ice coffins with his Tao essence. Because all of his energy and concentration had been focused on the task at hand, he hadn't been paying attention to anything else. Something unexpected must have occurred with Chu Yuan during that time. Even still, it didn't make sense that he wouldn't have noticed, unless Chu Yuan didn't leave on her own, unless someone came and took her away. Whoever it was couldn't be all heaven, because he couldn't enter this starry sky. It must have been someone else. That person's cultivation base would either have to be at the same level as Meng Hao's, or at least very close. There were some clues left behind. Although they were faint to the extreme, Meng Hao was the lord of the starry sky, a powerful expert in the ancestor realm. If he wanted to know something, then only someone with a cultivation base higher than his would be able to conceal it from him and leave behind no clues. But there were clues, and from them, Meng Hao was able to determine that whoever had taken away Chu Yuan had no ill intentions. Based on the auguries he had performed, he had come to be convinced that Chu Yuan being taken away was unprecedented good fortune for her. He even had the feeling that he might run into her again in the future. Because of that, he had chosen not to interfere. Instead, he allowed the place to simply remain sealed away like it had been before. After climbing the mountain, he walked up to the coffin and looked down into its emptiness. Memories flickered within his eyes, and eventually he sighed. It was almost as if he could hear the gentle voice of a young woman speaking to him. "Master, promise me that you'll tell me the second half of the story one day." Meng Hao felt emptier than ever. When Su Qing fell into slumber, she took away his heart. As he stood there thinking about Chu Yuyan, it was as if his will had also been taken away. Time passed and Meng Hao looked older than ever. He looked up into the sky, completely engulfed by loneliness. Eventually, he left. He strolled through the mountain and sea realm, visiting the mountains, going to the seas. Eventually, he reached the ninth sea. There he stopped and looked down. The ninth sea was more than half dried up. Guiding trireme was connected to Meng Hao by karma and was thus subject to the effects of the curse. Just like Patriarch Reliance, she had chosen to enter a state of sleep, allowing her to prolong her life. When he looked at the ninth sea, he could still sense faint fluctuations coming from guiding trireme. Gradually, his heart began to grow calm. He proceeded along, returning to the ninth mountain and the ice cave where all his memories lay. He sat down cross-legged next to the ice coffins which contained his parents and Su Qing, and his eyes flickered with focus and obsession. After all the time that had passed, he still hadn't given up on the idea of breaking the curse of all heaven. Recently, a new idea had occurred to him, an idea that seemed like madness. After the 9 demon sealing hexes, I wonder if there is actually a 10th hex. Time continued to pass, 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000. By now, 20,000 years had passed since Meng Hao's battle with all heaven. During that time, many of the people he had known in the vast expanse school died. It would be easier to find a phoenix feather or a killing horn than to find people within the starry sky of the mountains and seas who remembered Meng Hao. Any who did exist were ancient, eccentric beings. During the second 10,000-year period, the mountain and sea realm continued to expand. It grew more powerful, but at the same time, more corrupt. The 9 mountains became 9 separate factions who schemed and fought amongst each other. It reached the point where they even wanted to part ways from each other. Were it not for the fact that the 9 mountains and seas were fundamentally incapable of being separated, they definitely would have split apart. Of course, the schisms were not physical, but within the hearts of the people in the realm. Shields were erected between the 9 mountains and seas. In the past, they all had dealings with each other, but now they became separate worlds. The only way to pass from one to another was by fighting and killing. The expansion outside of the mountain and sea realm was similarly divided. As more and more living beings were subjugated, the mountain and sea realm eventually reached a peak state similar to when it had ruled the 3,000 lower realms in the past. In fact, they even surpassed that state and came to rule tens of thousands of other types of life forms. There was another power within the starry sky. During the first 10,000 years, it had remained relatively subdued, but in the second, it experienced explosive expansion. It was the Vast Expanse School. The Vast Expanse School had been the #1 power in years past, and during the second period of 10,000 years, it began to expand again. It swept across the starry sky, becoming just as illustrious as the mountain and sea realm. Eventually, the starry sky was split in two. As would be expected, friction arose. Smaller conflicts grew more intense, until eventually the two powers came to be as incompatible as fire and water. More and more powerful experts arose. The mountain and sea realm had full access to all of the powers provided by the precious treasure that was the realm itself. However, even though the older generation had all died, the new experts still were affected by karma and had significantly shorter longevity. Because of that, although their powerful experts were numerous, there was still a limit to their overall number. The Vast Expanse School was in a similar situation. The most powerful experts of the older generation were either dead or in secluded meditation. They had no precious treasure like the mountain and sea realm, but their powerful experts could live longer. In the end, neither side had a clear advantage, and they were relatively evenly matched. However, the number of paragons who rose up during that 20,000 years vastly exceeded the number from previous times. Not counting their secret reserve forces, each of the two powers had over 209 essences paragons. Because of that, the fighting grew more intense, until eventually, full-scale war erupted. Meng Hao didn't pay attention to any of that. He sat in secluded meditation, forgotten by the world. By now, the very few people who actually remembered him all assumed that he had long since left this starry sky. After all, it had been many, many years since he made any public appearances. His stories, his legend, was a thing from ancient times, buried within the depths of the past. The war between the mountain and sea realm and the Vast Expanse School went on for 1,000 years, and yet neither side could wipe the other out. In the end, they called a truce. The number of cultivators who died was beyond calculation. The only reason the truce had been called was because of the innumerable casualties. The enmity between the two forces was like an ocean of blood, a Gordian knot that could never be unraveled. Time passed. Another 5,000 years went by, and Meng Hao never came out of seclusion. He almost seemed to be sleeping, but the truth was that he was sitting there cross-legged, constantly analyzing the problem of the curse. At the same time, he was solidifying his place within the ancestor realm. He gave up on any attempts to look for all heaven outside the vast expanse. Years ago, he had been very anxious to fight, but now he realized that only one who needed to be anxious was all heaven, not himself. You want to hide? Hide then. I'll give you plenty of time. Grief will continue to waste away at my heart, but at the same time, you will continue to weaken. Meng Hao didn't even open his eyes. He remained there on the ninth mountain, allowing time to pass. Another 5,000 years went by. By now, 30,000 years had passed since the battle between Meng Hao and all heaven. After spending 1,000 years recovering and rebuilding, the mountain and sea realm and the vast expanse school began to fight their second full-scale war. This war was even more intense than the first one. In the first war, the two forces had been relatively evenly matched, but now the situation had changed. The tide of battle had shifted in favor of the vast expanse school, the reason being that one of their patriarchs had joined the fighting. That patriarch had lived for many, many years, for so long, in fact, that many people had completely forgotten about him. To most, he was a person of the past, a person who existed only in legend. His name was Xianxia. He had not died during his 30,000 years of meditation. He finally emerged, his cultivation base having reached a shocking level. He was now very, very old, so much so that he emanated an aura of rot and death. Despite that, he single-handedly slaughtered numerous 9 essences paragons from the mountain and sea realm. He alone changed the entire course of the war. His seeming invincibility struck despair into the hearts of his enemies. His ancient body seemed to contain limitless power, but when he looked at the mountain and sea cultivators, it was always with mixed emotions. He seemed to be thinking about the past, as if some terrifying and horrific entity existed deep within his gaze. When Xianxia joined the fighting, the mountain and sea cultivators instantly suffered a huge defeat. They were beaten back over and over by the army of the vast expanse school until they were just outside their home. Slaughter ensued outside of the 9 mountains and 9 seas. It was at this point, when the mountain and sea realm cultivators were in complete despair, that Xianxia gritted his teeth and prepared to lead the charge into the realm. However, as soon as he actually entered the borders, the 9 mountains and 9 seas began to tremble, and power rose up that caused all cultivators to shake. That power came from the 9 mountains and 9 seas themselves. It was something that could shake heaven and earth, and cause the entire starry sky to fill with rumbling sounds. The mountain and sea realm cultivators were instantly enlivened. That's the power of our ancestor. I heard a story once that the mountain and sea realm is actually a precious treasure, created by some ancestor in ancient times. While the mountain and sea realm cultivators reveled in their excitement, Xianxia let out an anguished cry. The explosive power he felt from the mountain and sea realm left him trembling. He immediately fell back at top speed. My mistake, please spare me for old time's sake. Xianxia was overwhelmed by fear and terror and immediately began to beg for his life. The same fear from 30,000 years ago still existed within his heart. However, almost as soon as the words left his mouth, he sensed that this power did not come from Meng Hao, but from the mountain and sea realm itself. He suddenly began to laugh bitterly. So, it's not even you that's trying to kill me. You're not even here anymore. What's trying to kill me is simply the power of the precious treasure you left behind. I, Xianxia, have a cultivation base that borders on transcendence, and yet I can't even fight back against the precious treasure you left behind too. Before he could even retreat any further, all of the cultivators, both from the mountains and seas and the vast expanse school, watched as this seemingly invincible eccentric was enveloped by the pursuing power of the 9 mountains and 9 seas. That power transformed into the image of a mountain and a sea, which then crushed down onto Xianxia. A boom echoed out in all directions, shaking everyone. When the image of the mountain and the sea faded away, the only thing that remained of Xianxia was a bloody paste. He had been killed in body and soul. Despite his incredible level of power, he had been cut down by a single attack. His death caused the entire battlefield to go completely silent. The cultivators from the vast expanse school started trembling and then shouting out in alarm. They knew they had been completely routed, and when they looked at the 9 mountains and 9 seas, it was with utter dread. In direct contrast, The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were overjoyed. They almost couldn't believe what they had just seen, and suddenly realized that there were things about their own home that they didn't fully comprehend. That was even more so considering that many people had heard the words Sha Jiudong spoken the moments before he died. They could tell that he was terrified, and yet, no one was sure who it was that he had been talking to. Apparently it was someone from long ago, someone who had intentionally disappeared. Apparently, it was a supremely glorious figure who no one remembered. And thus ended the war. As for Meng Hao, he remained in seclusion. He opened his eyes, and when he looked out at the starry sky, his gaze seemed profoundly ancient. After a moment passed, he closed his eyes and went back to meditating. Sha Jiudong's dying words seemed to open up a new world for the mountain and sea realm cultivators. In the following several thousand years, many people began to research the history of their home, to search for how it all began. They gave up on expansion, and gave up on any attempts to wage war with the vast expanse school. Instead, they focused on tracing their history back to its roots. Time passed. A fourth period of 10,000 years went by. The mountain and sea realm cultivators remained introspective, but the vast expanse school was the opposite. They swept through the starry sky, taking over more territory, although they always hesitated about whether to do something about the mountain and sea realm. That hesitation lasted for 10,000 years. But then, another of the vast expanse school's patriarchs underwent a shocking transformation. The person who emerged from seclusion was ancient and wore a golden robe. Everyone referred to him as Patriarch Goldrobes. It was none other than Jin Yunxian. The starry sky was completely shaken. Countless living beings trembled, and all cultivators could feel the aura of transcendence emanating out from the vast expanse school. Tens of thousands of years had passed, and Jin Yunxian was one of the few people still alive who remembered the events of the past. He had experienced the baptism of the Transcendence Deus and had followed Meng Hao into war. He had seen Meng Hao fighting and had been profoundly influenced by him. In the end, after tens of thousands of years had passed, just when his longevity was about to run out, his fleshly body reached transcendence. He reached a state similar to 9 seals all those years ago. He had taken his first step along the path of transcendence. Soon after, he even managed to make a cultivation-based breakthrough. The only thing he lacked was a transcendent soul. However, the soul was the most difficult step to take. Although his terrifying power hadn't reached the absolute peak, with a transcendent fleshly body and cultivation base, he was already more than half a step to completion. He could truly be listed among those who had transcended. Chapter 1596, Goldrobes covets the mountains and seas. After reaching that incredibly high level and emerging from secluded meditation, Jin Yunxian rocked the entire vast expanse school, and even the starry sky as a whole. The first thing he did after emerging was begin to challenge all of the Peak 9 Essence's experts to battle. It didn't matter if they were people from the past, or people who had risen up in recent millennia, he challenged all of them. Shockingly, the first person on his list was the former sect leader of the vast expanse school. However, upon reaching the sect leader's secluded meditation facilities, he stood there silently. After sensing the fluctuations of death from inside, he realized that the sect leader had long since returned to the dust. Much to the excitement of all the cultivators of the Vast Expanse School, he left planet Vast Expanse and found the old lizard, then the enormous head, and finally the termite queen. Gained victory 3 times, as easily as turning over his hand. Then he began to make his way through the rest of the starry sky. Everywhere he went, the powerful experts acknowledged allegiance and bowed their heads. Considering that he could easily defeat all of the Peak 9 Essence's experts, he quickly came to be known as the #1 most powerful expert in the starry sky of the mountains and seas. After everyone acknowledged him as having transcended, Jin Yunxian's ambition reached incredible heights. Countless living beings offered him worship, and countless cultivators revered him as the ultimate existence. Anywhere he went, countless voices would cry out in adoration and worship. Greetings, Patriarch Goldrobes. Greetings, Patriarch Goldrobes. Such cries rang out near and far. Countless eyes gazed upon him with fear and fanaticism. The feeling of having transcended caused him to think about Meng Hao and the glory and status Meng Hao had once commanded. I might not be as strong as Meng Hao was back then, but the gap can't be very wide. Jin Yunxian waved his hand, causing the natural laws in the area to flux and change. It was an intoxicating feeling that filled him with excitement and caused his laughter to echo out through the entire starry sky. Eventually, his gaze came to fall upon the mountain and sea realm. He refused to believe that after the tens of thousands of years which had passed, Meng Hao was still present. He was convinced that Meng Hao had almost certainly departed. Either that, or he had picked another fight with all heaven and been either killed or seriously wounded. Despite that, he held back. The terror of Meng Hao which existed in his heart caused him to hesitate. Whenever he thought of Meng Hao, fear filled him. Therefore, he turned his gaze away from the mountain and sea realm and he waited. Time passed. Another 10,000 years passed. Because of Jin Yunchen, the vast expanse school eventually came to occupy the entire starry sky, with the exception of the mountain and sea realm. Jin Yunchen never invaded it. Instead, he observed and waited, not yet daring to take any action. After those 10,000 years passed, Jin Yunchen's patience gradually ran out. After countless augury calculations, he finally became fully focused on the mountain and sea realm. However, he managed to hold back from simply invading. Instead, he began to form numerous clones which he sent to infiltrate the mountain and sea realm. Those clones observed, tested, and waited for another 10,000 years. Finally, he made his decision. Transcenders always create a precious treasure. Within this starry sky, the mountain and sea realm is that very transcendence treasure. Meng Hao, considering that you've departed, this precious treasure should belong to me. Jin Yunchen's eyes glittered as he began to make his way toward the mountain and sea realm. I actually hope that you haven't left, Meng Hao, he murmured. I hope that you fought again with all heaven and ended up being seriously injured. That way, I can consume you the same way you consumed all heaven, and thus transcend in soul. His eyes glinted with profound ambition. It only took him a few strides through the starry sky to reach the mountain and sea realm. As he hovered outside, he studied the place, and his eyes flickered with praise. Years ago, he had been unable to truly comprehend how incredible the mountain and sea realm was, but with his current cultivation base, he could now see all of the various dazzling aspects to the realm. The embodiment of 9 profound natural laws, the 9 hexes of the League of Demon Sealers. Meng Hao, you left your legacy behind, sealed within this precious treasure. Unfortunately, after all these tens of thousands of years, not a single person in the mountain and sea realm has been able to combine all of your hexing magic essences. Neither has anyone transcended. Leaving this treasure here would be a big waste. I'll take it. Perhaps it can even help me to transcend in soul. Jin Yunchen took a deep breath, which caused the entire starry sky to shake. Rumbling like thunder could be heard, breaking through the barriers of the mountain and sea realm to fill the heaven and earth which existed inside. Countless cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were profoundly shaken, and coughed up mouthfuls of blood. Heaven shaking, earth-shattering power erupted from Jin Yunchen, pouring into the mountain and sea realm to crush down onto its innumerable cultivators. Before any of the cultivators could react or struggle, they were slammed into the ground. Their eyes were bloodshot and they were howling inwardly. And yet, they could do nothing but look up at the heavens and trembled. Jin Yunchen slowly descended into the mountain and sea realm, tearing apart the heavens there, causing golden light to spread out without cease. The protective barrier surrounding the mountain and sea realm was torn open. Behind the golden-robed Jin Yunchen, vortexes sprang up, out of which emerged countless cultivators from the vast expanse school. After they dropped to their knees to bow in greeting, Jin Yunchen waved his golden sleeve, sending them pouring into the mountain and sea realm. Few of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm could even struggle against the pressure. However, there were a few paragons among them who managed to fly up into the air. One after another they tried to fight back, but all Jin Yunchen had to do was wave his sleeve, and they were shoved back down. Blood sprayed out of the mouths of the mountain and sea realm paragons as they were slammed back down into the ground. Over the past millennia, numerous mountain and sea cultivators had done extensive research into their history. Although none of them knew the full truth, they had managed to piece together various clues, and now began to call out for help from the precious treasure that was the mountain and sea realm. The cultivators of the mountain and sea realm are protected by the realm itself. No outside force can destroy us. Precious treasure of the mountains and seas, please protect us from the invading cultivators. O precious treasure of our ancestor, please do something. Even as their voices rose up, the 9 mountains and 9 seas began to tremble. Light sprang up, which instantly shot toward Jin Yunchen. That light was the exact same light which had crushed Sha Jiudong so many years ago. However, even as that light neared Jin Yunchen, I hereby declare, he said coolly, that the natural laws of this world are now different. He extended his right hand, and the power of his transcendent fleshly body and cultivation base converged on his finger. The light from the mountains and seas trembled for a moment, and then shattered, sending countless sparks flying about in all directions. When the mountain and sea cultivators saw that, they were completely shaken and could do nothing but stare in shock.